In the Anderson household, chaos is. It is a quiet summer afternoon in Mount Mary, Maryland. In the Anderson household, chaos is about to erupt. The mother, Violette, is sleeping in her bedroom. The son, called William, is warming up his Xbox and he is about to rage. Bill is driving home from work. William gets into a round of Fortnite and he screams at 100 decibels loud. Violette gets awoken. She runs into William's bedroom and she rips the bedroom door off its hinges. Violette screams at William. William screams in anger and he slaps Violette in the downstairs area. Violette drags William downstairs and she punches his nutsack. William roars and he grabs lighter fluid. Violette screams and she roars like King Kong. William grabs Violette's phone and he runs outside. A few seconds later, William drowns the phone in lighter fluid and gasoline. William grabs a flamethrower and he burns Violette's phone. A few seconds later, the phone battery explodes and William runs to get Violette. Violette bolts outside and she douses the fire. The father, Bill, arrives home from work. He gets out of his car and Violette explains the entire situation. Bill screams in anger and he runs inside. William burns Bill's bucket of work tools. William douses the fire the second Bill and Violette walk outside. Violette screams in anger and she barks at William. This causes William to hijack Bill's truck and he runs over Bill's foot. Violette hears Bill scream in pain. Violette and Bill walk to the living room and Bill sits down in his chair. Violette checks on Bill's foot. Violette says it isn't broken and is just injured. Violette hands Bill an ice pack wrapped in a towel. A few minutes later, William walks into the house. Violette and Bill scold William for 20 minutes. Then they head to bed. In the morning, Violette grabs a gong and she bangs it to wake up William. William wakes up and he punches Violette. Violette ignores it and the family walks down for pancakes. The boys wolf down 10 pancakes in a matter of seconds. William is forced to wash the dirty dishes. Violette opens the dishwasher and she pulls the rack out. William grabs several dishes and he smashes them on the floor. Violette screams in anger and Bill walks to his BB gun shed. William throws a pan at the window and the window explodes. Violette continues scolding William. Bill returns and he shoots William in the rear end multiple times. Bill walks out laughing like a maniac. Violette hugs William and Bill tackles Violette. William drags Bill to his chair and William ties down Bill. A few seconds later, the family calms down and Bill is unchained. They then change into their swimsuits and they walk out to the pool. Violette screams in anger and she punctures a massive hole in the pool liner. The pool water floods the backyard and it floods into the road. Violette changes into her regular clothes and she burns her Tesla. Bill douses the fire and he ties down Violette. Violette wiggles out of her restraints and she runs to grab her car keys to her minivan. Violette then drives off and the boys get into Bill's truck. They drive off and chase the minivan. Bill drives to Burger King and he orders 250 cheeseburgers. William opens a tracker and the boys speed to Violette's top secret hideout. Bill finds the hideout and the boys run in. Violette is found playing video games. Violette is dragged to Bill's truck. Bill chains down Violette and the boys get into the front seat. They then drive off and drive home. Once home, Violette apologizes for running away. The boys then go to the truck and bring in the bags of 250 Burger King cheeseburgers. The boys devour the meal in a matter of minutes. Bill takes the trash outside and William burns the paper plates with a flamethrower. Bill then runs to the top secret hideout and he drives the minivan home. The boys then unchain Violette and the family have a massive movie night. Violette screams in anger and she runs to the shed. Violette then grabs a BB gun from Bill's BB gun shed. Violette runs to the living room and she shoots the TV in the living room. Bill tackles Violette and they get into a disastrous fight. After the fight, the family head to bed. In the morning, the family wakes up and has 40 pounds of oatmeal for breakfast. Violette then screams in anger and she throws the 40-pound bowl of oatmeal to the floor and a massive shockwave shakes the house. Violette then flips the table in anger and she rips her armpit hair off. Bill picks up Violette and he surprises the family with 3 plane tickets for a weekend getaway to Hawaii. Violette and William freak out and they scream with excitement. Bill grabs 12 suitcases and the family pack up all their clothes and belongings. They finish packing their belongings and pack the other essential supplies. Violette and the boys finish packing the other supplies and they watch some TV until noon. At noon, the be-driven van arrives. The family take their suitcases out and they help the driver load up the suitcases. The family load up into the van and they are driven to the airport. 1 hour later, they arrive at the airport. The family grab their neon yellow luggage and they walk into the airport. The family checks and then they drop their luggage off. During security, Bill gets caught with a BB gun in his pants. Bill gives up the BB gun and the family walk to the gate. They order 200 cheeseburgers from Burger King and they walk to the gate. Once at the gate, the family devours the meal. 20 minutes later, the family board the plane. Violette and the boys put their carry-on backpacks under the seat in front of them. They then sit down and wait for the safety instructions. 20 minutes later, the plane taxis to the runway. Once on the runway, the plane speeds up. The family jerks back in their seats and they watch the plane taking off. They watch in amazement as the plane flies higher and higher. The family watches the flight map for an hour. Then the flight attendants take dinner requests. Bill puts in a request for 20 pounds of meatballs. The family gets their dinners. Violette and William sit in embarrassment as Bill wolfs down his 20-pound bowl of meatball enchiladas. Bill finishes his food and he licks the plate clean. 20 minutes later, Violette and William finish eating. Violette puts headphones in and she works on her laptop. William watches videos on his phone, and Bill uses the John. 3 hours later, the airplane lands. Bill is still in the John. Violette runs to the John and she rips the door off. Violette sees that Bill is having a dance party. The family pack up their carry-ons and they exit the plane. They head to the luggage collection. They collect their neon yellow suitcases and the family exit the airport. They admire the gorgeous view of Hawaii. The family walk to rent a car. They then drive to the hotel. 20 minutes later, they arrive at the hotel. They find a place to park and they check in. Bill parks the car, as Violette and William find the room. They wait for Bill. Once Bill arrives, they slide the keycard through the keycard reader and the door opens. The family enters the room and they gasp in amazement. The family got the penthouse on the top floor of the hotel. The family chosses their bedroom and they unpack everything. As Violette puts away her clothes she hears screaming. Violette runs to William's room. She finds out William is already raging his head off at his teammates on Call of Duty. Violette makes it clear that if he disturbs the other hotel guests his consoles will be thrown off the deck. William ignores her and he rages even louder. Violette tells him to turn off the Xbox because they are having a movie night. William powers down his Xbox and he walks to the living room. William sits down and Violette puts the movie on. Bill grabs a 20-pound bowl of snacks and he mixes them together. Bill then blends the snacks into a disgusting smoothie. Bill chugs the smoothie in a matter of seconds. Violette and William sit there in disgust. Violette and the boys sit down and they start the movie. 20 minutes into the 3-hour movie William gets up and he breaks the living room TV. Violette scolds William and the family head to bed. The family wakes up for a chaotic Saturday. Violette makes 300 pancakes and the boys devour 150 pancakes each. Bill grabs the hundreds of dishes and he places them in the sink. William sneaks to his room and he warms up his PlayStation 5. Violette runs to William's room and she drags William to the kitchen. William screams in anger and he rips apart the dishwasher. Bill explodes in anger and he slaps William in the rear end. The family change into their swim costumes and they run down to the pool. The family puts on sunscreen and they jump into the pool. Violette then splashes the boys. Bill screams in anger and he runs away. A few minutes later Bill returns with a giant bucket of water. Violette gets drenched in seawater as she is taking a nap. Violette then starts beating Bill. William breaks up the fight and the family dries off. They walk back to the penthouse suite. A few hours later Bill cooks up turkey burgers for lunch. When William enters the kitchen he screams like an angry god and he throws the pan off the deck. Thankfully the pan didn't hit anyone. Bill then screams in anger and he tackles William. Violette breaks the fight up and the boys are forced to apologize. The family change into their skydiving suits and they walk to the truck. The family loads up and they drive off to the airport. Violette and the boys check in and they get parachutes. 20 minutes later the family board the plane. The pilot gives her speech and then the plane takes off. 1 hour later the family put their parachutes on and they line up. Bill stands at the edge of the door. William is right behind Bill. The boys are pushed out of the airplane by Violette. 20 minutes later on the ground Violette is being scolded and barked at for her behavior. Then the family walk back to the airport and they hand back the parachutes. They walk to the truck and drive back to the hotel. Back in the penthouse the family orders a feast for dinner. 2 hours later the food arrives. The family ordered breadsticks, garlic bread, pasta, burgers, pizza, salad, cake, oatmeal, sushi, squid surprise, cabbage casserole, and they ordered apple pie. The family dig into a massive feast and they hit the hay early. The next day the family wake up. The family walk to the kitchen and have 20 bowls of bread pudding for breakfast. After breakfast William washes the dishes. Violette pulls the rack. William loads up the dishwasher correctly. Violette goes to use the John. William takes out the bottle of dishwashing soap and he screws the lid off. William drains the entire 2-gallon bottle into the dishwasher. William starts the cycle and he runs to his bedroom to play on his temporary phone. Violette exits the John 20 minutes later to find an ocean of bubbles originating from the dishwasher. William is dragged to the kitchen and he is forced to clean up. Violette hands William towels, but William starts vacuuming the bubble ocean up. 20 seconds later William throws the vacuum off the deck. Bill runs to the deck and he sees no one was hit. Bill and Violette scold William as he is mopping the bubble ocean. 2 minutes later Violette opens the dishwasher and she sees the true extent of the damage. Violette screams in anger and shock. William takes the dishes out and he washes them. Violette cleans up the inside of the dishwasher. Bill finishes mopping the floor. 20 minutes later the mess is cleaned up. Violette then changes into her swim costume and she walks to the hot tub to relax. 3 hours later she returned to the room. Violette explores the penthouse. She finds the boys watching TV. Violette changes into her daytime clothes and she runs to the living room. Violette then smashes the living room TV in anger. She then walks to the outdoor pool. Violette throws the TV into the pool and she races back to the hotel room. Bill flips out at Violette. The boys and Violette get into a raging fight and they fight for 3 hours. 3 hours later the family stops fighting and they eat spaghetti and meatballs for dinner. They then head to bed. In the morning the family pack up and they watch TV until 11 a.m. They then check out and walk to the truck. Violette and the boys drive to the airport and they drop the truck off. Soon they walk to check in and they scan their passports. 2 minutes later the family enters the luggage drop-off line. 20 minutes later they drop off their 12 neon yellow suitcases. They then walk to security and pass through it with no trouble. A few hours later the family board the plane. A few minutes later the plane taxis to the runway. At the runway the plane speeds down the runway and the family jerks back in their seats. 2 hours later the flight attendant serves snacks. Then the captain says they are landing in 12 minutes. The family watches as the plane lands and they pack up their carry-ons. The family congratulate the pilots as they exit the plane. The family then walk to the baggage claim and they collect their 12 neon yellow suitcases. 20 minutes later the family get onto a van and they are driven home. 1 hour later the family arrives home and they unpack everything. The family head to bed. 12 hours later they wake up. They get ready for the day and head to the kitchen for a waffle feast. Violette washes and loads the dishwasher and she starts a cycle. A few minutes later the dishwasher stops. Violette drags the dishwasher to the deck and she pushes it down the stairs. Violette then grabs a flamethrower and she burns the dishwasher. Bill runs outside and he douses the fire out. Violette gets chained down to Bill's chair. Violette apologizes and she is unchained. William goes up to his room to rage on Roblox. 20 minutes later Bill turns the internet router off. William disconnects from his Xbox and he throws his controller across the room. A few seconds later William storms downstairs and he scolds Bill. William pushes Bill to the floor and he grabs a match and a towel. William runs outside and he locks the door. William grabs lighter fluid as Violette rips the front door off its hinges. William goes to Bill's car and he lights it on fire. Violette exits the house and she yells for Bill. A few seconds later Bill bolts outside and he grabs the garden hose. Violette then screams in anger and she rips the hose apart. Bill turns the hose on and he starts extinguishing the massive car fire. A few minutes later William starts throwing rocks into the car. Violette screams in anger and she grabs William's arm. Violette drags William inside and she scolds William. A few hours later Violette prepares a salad for dinner. William walks into the living room when Violette goes to the John. A few minutes later Violette returns to the kitchen. She grabs the salad and she walks to the living room. Violette hands William the salad. A few minutes later of arguing causes William to tell Violette that she can shove the salad up her rear end. Violette screams in anger as William walks to the kitchen and he grabs Violette's car keys. William runs to Violette's minivan. Violette then sits down and she closes her eyes. William gets into the minivan and he locks the door. William then honks the horn and Violette bolts outside. Violette sees the minivan driving off. 20 minutes later William arrives back with the minivan. Violette scolds William for taking her minivan. William ignores her and he devours his Arby's. William runs up to his bedroom and he rages on his Xbox. 20 seconds later Violette heads to bed. A few hours later at 3 a.m. William wakes up and he warms up his Xbox. William puts his headset on and he gets into a round of Uno online. William gets a +4 card on him. William then screams like a god. Violette wakes up and she bolts into William's bedroom. Violette then grabs William's controller and she eats it. William then tackles Violette and he bites her an angry bite. William tackles Violette and he beats her up. Bill gets awoken and he picks up William. Bill throws William to the floor and Bill beats up Violette. The family head to bed and wakes up 6 hours later. The family heads downstairs and they get ready for the day. 3 hours later the family finishes getting ready and they drive out to an all-you-can-eat buffet for lunch. They arrive at the buffet and the boys bolt inside. Violette and the boys order water. A few seconds later the boys run up to the food and they grab every steamed tray. The boys devour all the food in the restaurant. 30 minutes later the boys run into the kitchen and raid it for anything edible. They then clear the dessert and drinks area. The boys head to the John. 2 hours later they exit the John. Then the manager comes and he bans the Anderson family for life. A few hours later at home the family are having lasagna soup for dinner. After dinner they head to bed. In the morning Bill wakes up at 2 a.m. and he runs out to rent a RV truck. He drives home and parks it. At 10 a.m. the family wakes up and they get surprised. Bill surprises Violette and William with the RV truck. The family packs half the house into the RV. At 3 p.m. the family drive off. Bill starts the drive to the Thousand Trails Bend Sunriver campsite in Oregon. The family have a 40-hour drive ahead of them. Violette works on her laptop and she edits videos for the YouTube channel. Violette uploads a video and William warms up his Xbox. A few seconds later Bill hears screaming. He pulls over and he runs to the main RV. Violette and Bill enter William's room and they tell William to shut up. Violette goes to take a nap and Bill walks to the driver's cab. Bill returns to driving. 3 hours later Bill turns into a highway rest area for the night. Bill goes to the main cabin and Violette serves up several Cuban sandwiches for dinner. After dinner the family watches TV until midnight. Then they head to bed. At 7 a.m. Bill wakes up and he gets ready for the day. He has breakfast and he goes to the cab of the RV truck. Bill gets on the freeway and he starts driving to the Thousand Trails Bend Sunriver campsite in Oregon. 2 hours later Bill pulls into a gas station and he fills the RV truck with gasoline. Violette and William wake up as Bill starts driving again. Violette and William eat breakfast and they get dressed. 3 days later the family arrived at the campsite. They check in and find their camping spot. Bill reverses the truck into the spot and the family take all the camping stuff out and they set up for a 2-day getaway in Oregon. Violette and the boys change into their swim costumes and they pack a pool bag. They get into a side-by-side and they drive off to the lake next to the park. The family finds a spot and they place their stuff down. Violette and the boys run into the lake and they swim around. 2 hours later they get out and dry off. Then the family gets a dinner of cheeseburgers. They then drive the side-by-side back to the camping spot. Violette and the boys change into their pajamas and they head to bed. In the morning the family wakes up and they have a breakfast of oatmeal and waffles. After breakfast the family takes a shower and they get dressed. Violette and the boys get into the side-by-side and they drive off to the canteen. The family arrives and they each spend $300 for supplies and other necessities. Violette and the boys then drive back to the camp spot and they bring the supplies and necessities into the RV truck. After lunch the family prepare for a massive hike up a mountain with 11,200 foot altitude. Violette and the boys load up their supplies into backpacks and they walk to the side-by-side. Once at the base of the mountain the family park and they get a map. They hike up the mountain. Violette then opens the map and the family begin the 2-hour hike up the mountain. Bill sneaks off to the John as Violette and William start hiking without him. 20 seconds later Bill sneaks to the side-by-side and he drives it up a road to the summit of Mount Hood. Bill drives back to the parking lot and he runs up the trail. 2 minutes later Bill explains everything. The family then walk up the 9-mile trail. 2 hours later they arrive at the top of the mountain. They admire the view. 20 minutes later they go to a massive track atop Mount Hood. They get into a gondola and they fly down a track. 2 minutes later they arrive at the base of the mountain. They then walk 3 miles to the parking lot. Once at the parking lot the family go into the gift shop and they each purchase one souvenir. They then drive back to the camping site and they drive to their camping spot. Then the family watch Avengers Endgame. After the movie the family eat dinner and head to bed. The next day the family pack up everything. They clean up the entire spot where their RV truck is. They then drive to the check-in and they check out. Bill returns the side-by-side to the campsite's vehicle rental building. Bill then runs for 10 minutes then he starts driving back to Mount Airy, Maryland. 4 days of uneventful driving later the family arrive back at the house. Then the three of them take everything out of the RV truck and Bill drives off to return the RV truck. Bill runs home and he sees Violette and William in the bathroom. Violette is scolding William for busting the drawer. William is screaming his face off at Violette and the two of them get into a massive fight. Bill breaks it up and everyone apologizes. Violette and the boys head to bed. 3 days later the family are surprised when William's sister Lucy and Lucy's adopted son Zachary visit. Lucy hugs everyone and Zachary gets fed a snack from William. A few minutes later William's Andy comes over and he surprises everyone by announcing he got into college in Paris, France. Lucy and Zachary get back into Lucy's car and they drive off. A few minutes later Andy leaves and William then runs upstairs and he warms up his Xbox. A few minutes later William smashes his TV. Violette runs upstairs and she kicks down the brand new door to William's bedroom. Bill walks up and he scolds William. William turns his TV on. Violette and Bill beat up William for breaking another TV. The family head downstairs and they walk to the minivan. Violette and the boys drive off to the mall for an outing. They go to 20 stores and purchase hundreds of items. They walk back to the minivan and drive back home. The next day William gets awoken with a gong. Violette says it is time for back to school shopping. William demonstrates his frustration by punching his wall. Violette goes out for the supplies herself. Once home William runs downstairs when he hears the word ice cream. Violette hands William his supplies. William takes out a pencil. Violette calls them happy pencils. William takes a happy pencil and he slaps Violette's shoulder with it. A few seconds later William tells Violette she can eat the happy pencils. Violette explodes in anger and she calls for Bill. Bill runs out the door and says he has to go to work. A few seconds later William takes out a binder and he rips it in half. Violette scolds William as he rips and smashes his school supplies. Violette goes to the John and William runs outside with the supplies. William grabs lighter fluid and a match. He burns the school supplies and Violette runs outside. A minute later the fire is doused and Violette is scolding William. The next day William wakes up and he dreads having to go to the first day of school. Violette and William get ready for the day. William gets into the minivan and he is driven to school. During the first period William throws a desk at a window. A few minutes later William is in the headmaster's office. Violette and Bill are there too. William gets a 1-week suspension and he is driven home. Violette and Bill tackle William and they chain him down to a chair. William makes a 3-hour apology and he is unchained. Violette cooks lunch and the family has pasta salad for lunch. 1 week later William gets up and he has to go back to school. William gets ready for the day. He packs a lunch and he gets on the bus. Once at school William has an almost flawless day. During 9th period William whips a fellow student with a wet towel. A few seconds later William gets called to the headmaster's office via intercom. A few minutes later the headmaster gets on a call with Violette and Bill. The headmaster explains the situation. He says that William is getting a 1-month suspension and it is going on his permanent record. William walks home. Once home Violette scolds William for getting another suspension. Violette then goes out to TV Hut to purchase 80-inch 18K TV. Once home Violette sets it up. William turns it on and he watches TV. Violette tells William that he needs to cut the grass. William runs outside and he lights the reel mower on fire. Violette douses the fire out. A few minutes later Violette gets some flex tape and she repairs the pool liner that she busted up. Violette fills the pool up and tops the chemicals off. Violette and William then change into their swim costumes and they jump into the freezing cold pool. They instantly get out and dry off. The pool is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Violette and William warm up by toasting marshmallows. They eat some s'mores and they extinguish the fire. Bill returns home from work. Bill frowns at William with disappointment. Violette explains the entire day and Bill hugs William for breaking their 40-year-old reel mower. Violette goes out to purchase a battery-operated lawn mower. The boys have a party while Violette is gone. A few hours later Violette returns home with a trunk full of groceries. The boys carry everything inside and Violette puts everything away. Violette and the boys head to bed. 12 hours later the family wakes up and William begins his new school. A few hours later William comes home because he got suspended for committing tax fraud against the Russian government on a school computer. Violette grabs William's bucket of Pokemon cards and she burns it. William douses the fire before the $9 million card was burned. Violette then screams in anger and she eats every Pokemon card. William cries and cries until Bill arrives home from work. He is pleased that William has some computer skills. Bill hugs William. A few days later William gets his suspension lifted at the Mount Airy High School. Violette drags William to the minivan and she drives off to the school. 2 minutes later William runs inside and he goes to the in-school suspension room. William gets a work booklet. 20 minutes later William rips his booklet and he gets his face slapped by the headmaster. Violette picks up William and the ride home is filled with cuss words and nagging. Once home Bill and Violette tackle William. Violette calls William an inappropriate word. Bill screams in shock. Violette screams like an angry goddess and she rips her chest hair off. The boys sneak upstairs as Violette goes on a cussing fit. A few hours later Violette calms down and she cooks dinner for the boys. 20 minutes later the boys run downstairs and they devour the taco bar that Violette set up for dinner. The boys race to the single John in the entire house. The boys get into a raging fight and William gets in first. 4 minutes later he leaves. Bill then runs to the John and he deadbolts the door closed and he barricades it. Violette washes the dirty dishes and she starts a cycle on the dishwasher. 3 hours later Bill exits the John after his dance party. Violette cleans the John out and she cleans the John up. The boys head to bed. Violette heads to bed after deep cleaning the living room. In the morning William starts his third school. Violette drags William's worthless rear end out of his bed. Violette then drags William to the minivan and she throws William's worthless rear end into the minivan. William starts crying as Violette chains down William. Violette then drives off to the third school. Once they arrive Violette puts a muzzle on William. Violette then drags William into the school and she throws William's worthless behind into the owner's office. William gets unchained. Violette goes to the minivan. A few seconds later William blows up the owner's office. A few seconds later the owner returns from the John. William gets scolded and he gets expelled from his third school. 10 minutes later at home Violette screams her head off and she rips apart a metal fence. Violette calms down and she calls for Bill. Bill runs home from work and he barks at William like an animal. The family calm down and apologize. They walk outside and they hop into the minivan. Bill drives the family to the mall. They arrive at the mall and walk into the mall. Violette and the boys spend $12,730 and they drive off with a trunk full of goodies. Once home they unpack everything. Violette changes into her swim dress and the boys change into their swim trunks. The family puts on some sunscreen and they walk out to the heated pool. The family jumps in and they swim for 5 hours. After drying off they walk inside and they defrost 3 portions of banquet spaghetti and meatballs. They walk to the TV and they watch Violette1st videos until midnight. When it turns midnight the family clean up and they change into their pajamas. They head to bed and they wake up at 9 a.m. The family gets ready for the day and they get dressed and showered. Violette eats some oatmeal for breakfast and the boys eat triple deep fried Pop-Tarts for breakfast. After breakfast the family go to the John. 20 minutes later the minivan is driven off the property. William has stolen the minivan yet again. Bill and Violette run outside and they patiently wait for William. 20 minutes later William returns to the house with the minivan. Violette and Bill bark at William for stealing the minivan for the second time. A few hours later the family arrive at an all-you-can-eat Chinese food buffet. The family get served their drinks. The family walk up to the food and they take all the steamed trays. The family eat everything they grabbed. They then raid the drinks area, kitchen and dessert table for anything edible. 30 minutes later they pay the bill and they walk out. Violette demands that the boys go to a gym and they should lose the weight. William screams in anger and he punches himself. A minute later the family drives home and the boys change into their swim trunks. They run into the pool and swim for 2 hours. Then they all head to bed at 2 p.m. The next day the family wakes up at 10 a.m. The family packs up their entire house into 20 neon yellow suitcases for a 3-day trip in Aruba. They eat breakfast and then they watch TV until 2 p.m. Then the bee-driven van arrives. The family helps the driver load up the 20 neon yellow suitcases and the family board the van. 20 minutes later they create a list of ideas on what activities they should do in Aruba. 40 minutes later they arrive at the airport. The family grab the 20 suitcases and they walk into the airport. They check in and they wait 20 minutes to drop their luggage off. Soon they have to pay $3 grand for the excess weight in their luggage. Violette and the boys walk to security. They go through a metal detector and a pat down. Bill ends up getting caught with an extension cord in his pants. Bill explains that he was going to discipline William with it. The security officers take it and the family take their carry-ons to the gate. Halfway through the walk the family gets a snack and they arrive at the gate. 2 hours later they board the plane. Violette and the boys put their carry-ons under the seat in front of them and they sit down. The flight attendants do the safety instructions and the captains announce that they are taking off. Violette works on her laptop and she edits a video for their channel on YouTube. Violette finishes editing it and she uploads it. The boys watch some TV until the flight attendants take dinner requests. Bill orders a 30-pound bowl of bean soup. William orders a 3-pound meatball. Violette orders a small salad. Violette screams in anger and she rips apart her laptop in anger. Violette punches the mini TV in front of her and she calms down. A few minutes later the dinners come out. The boys annihilate their dinner. Violette sits with embarrassment as the boys annihilate their dinners. The boys finish their dinners and they fall asleep. 2 hours later the boys wake up and the family pack up their carry-ons. Soon the airplane lands and the family collect their 20 neon yellow suitcases. Violette and the boys exit the airport and they breathe in the delicious air of Aruba. Violette rents a pickup and the boys load the 20 neon yellow suitcases into the bed of the pickup. Violette drives off to the Costa Linda Hotel. The family checks in and they find the parking lot. After parking the family walk up to the top floor. They open the door to the penthouse and they gasp in amazement. The family enters the penthouse and they choose their bedrooms. They unpack every suitcase and they change into their pajamas. They head to bed and wake up at 9 a.m. They eat some oatmeal for breakfast then they change into their skydiving costumes. Violette and the boys get into the pickup truck and they drive off to the airport. Violette and the boys get their parachutes and they get onto the skydiving plane. 1 hour later they take off. 20 minutes later the family gets lined up. The boys push Violette out of the airplane. 20 minutes later the boys land and they get barked at by Violette who is pissed off. The family return the parachutes and they drive back to the hotel. They get onto the elevator and go up to the top floor. They then change into their swimsuits. Violette then packs the pool bag and the family walk to the elevator. The boys put on sunscreen and they put their stuff in the pool bag. The boys then bolt down the 28 flights of stairs. The boys run into Violette and she falls over. The boys continue racing and they cannonball into the pool. Violette gets up and she puts everything at the cabana. Violette gets into the pool and she beats up the boys for their behavior. Security comes and they take Violette away for questioning. 29 minutes later Violette returns. William then splashes Bill with massive waves. Bill runs for cover. Violette and William go into the hot tub and they relax. 3 hours later the family dry off and they walk back to the hotel room. The family change into their pajamas and they eat a spaghetti lasagna casserole for dinner. A few minutes later the family go do their things. William races to his room and he warms up his Xbox. Violette edits a video and Bill drinks some beer. A few seconds later a crashing sound comes from William's bedroom. Violette and Bill bolt towards William's room. A few seconds later William's bedroom door is ripped open. Violette and Bill then bolt into the room. Violette and Bill see William has broken his headset and he is destroying it. Violette and Bill breathe in and they scream at William. Soon other guests call the manager. The manager runs up to the Andersons' room. The manager kicks the door down and she tells the Andersons they need to shut their pie holes. The manager then leaves and she repairs the door. Violette barricades the door and she heads to bed. The next day the family wake up. Violette cooks up a 300-pound bowl of blended Pop-Tarts. Bill throws the bowl off the deck. A minute later it explodes and hundreds of people get covered in blended Pop-Tart smoothie. Violette barks at Bill. 1 second later William tackles Bill. The family walks inside and they sit down to watch TV. 2 hours later William gets up and he smashes the TV. Violette explodes in anger and she beats the crap out of William. Bill gets up and he breaks the fight up. Violette starts crying and she takes a cherry bomb out of her underpants. Violette runs to the master bathroom and she blows the John up. The boys hug Violette and they walk to the living room. Bill has Violette sit down. 2 hours later the family change into their swim costumes and William packs a pool bag. William takes the barricade down and the family walk to the elevator. Violette takes the elevator and the boys race downstairs and they rip the staircase door off its hinges. Violette exits the elevator and she sees the boys racing to the ocean. Violette runs after them. A couple minutes later they arrive at the ocean. Violette and the boys put everything at a cabana and they empty an entire can of sunscreen. Violette and the boys race to the ocean. Violette and the boys jump in and they swim for 3 hours. 3 hours later they dry off and walk back to the hotel room. 1 hour later the boys walk into the kitchen and they have cabbage casserole for dinner. Violette washes the dishes and she starts a cycle on the dishwasher. The family then watches TV until midnight. Then they head to bed. At 7 a.m. they wake up and start packing up. The family packs all the clothes, food and necessities in their 20 neon yellow suitcases. They then have breakfast and they watch TV until 11 a.m. Then they walk to the reception. They check out and they load the suitcases into the pickup. Violette drives to the rental car building and they drop the pickup off. The family walks into the airport and they check in. They then go through customs. 20 minutes later they drop off the luggage and they pass through security with no issues. The family walk to the gate. Halfway to the gate they get a snack from Burger King and they finish the walk. 20 minutes later they use the John and board the plane. They find their seats and the family put their carry-ons under the seat in front of them. The family sit down and the flight attendants give their safety demonstration. 20 minutes later the family stares out of the window as the flight takes off. A few minutes later Violette and the boys watch their mini TVs. Violette then takes out 2 family-size bags of Lay's sour cream and onion chips. The boys grab the bags and they rip the bags open. The boys grab fistfuls of chips and they start hoovering the chips. Bill licks his chip bag clean. William rips his bag apart to eat any remaining crumbs. The boys demand for more chips. The boys raid Violette's backpack and they take out 10 bags of family-size chips. The boys fight to the death for the bags. Bill ends out victorious and he devours 10 pounds of chips. Violette sighs in embarrassment and she closes her bag. A few minutes later dinner requests are filled out. The boys each ordered a 2-pound chicken parmesan pan. Violette orders a small salad. The boys dig into 2 pounds of chicken parm as Violette savors her salad. After dinner the family lay down and they catch some sleep. 2 hours later they wake up when the passengers start leaving. The family pack everything into their carry-ons and they walk to baggage claim. William has the brilliant idea to dance on the conveyor belt of the luggage claim. A few seconds later security came and they beat the crap out of William. A few minutes later Violette and the boys collect their 20 neon yellow suitcases. The family walk to the bedriven van and they get on. Violette helps load the suitcases into the trunk of the van. Violette gets into the van. Bill then gets into the van and the driver brings the family home. 1 hour later they arrive home. The family get their suitcases and they walk inside. Violette and the boys walk inside and they unpack everything. After unpacking they head to bed. The next day at 11 a.m. the family wakes up and they have 20 bowls of oatmeal for breakfast. Bill licks every bowl clean and Violette does the dishes. William runs upstairs to play Call of Duty. Bill heads out to work. 8 hours later William is still raging on Xbox. Violet is taking a nap in the living room. Violet wakes up and she asks William if he has any homework. William states he has to write a 200-page report on the history of yarn. Violet runs upstairs and she pokes and prods William. William states he is not doing the assignment. Violet goes to her bedroom and she grabs her Chromebook. William and Violet get into a massive argument over what the Chromebook is called. A few minutes later Violet and William walk downstairs. Violet screams in anger when William throws the Chromebook halfway across the house. William grabs the Chromebook, some matches and a bottle of lighter fluid. William walks outside and he deadbolts the door closed. William sets up a barricade. Then he lights the Chromebook and fire. Violet unlocks the door and she destroys the barricade. Violet runs to the backyard and she grabs the hose. Violet turns the hose on and she runs to the fire. William runs to turn the hose off. A few minutes later the hose is still being turned off and on and the fire is still going. Violet fills a bucket with water. A few seconds later Bill arrives home from work. Violet then douses the fire out. Bill gets out of his truck and he breathes in. Bill then screams for 20 seconds straight. After that Bill runs after William. Bill pushes William into a pile of mud. Violet comforts William. This causes Bill to get back into his truck. Bill then drives off. The next day Bill returns home in time for lunch. The boys each eat 20 pasta Neapolitans that contain 2,500 calories each. In total the boys each ate 50,000 calories in one sitting. Violet knows what is going to happen next. 5 minutes later the boys race to the John. William wins the race and he takes 2 minutes. Bill then races into the John and he deadbolts the door closed. 3 hours later Bill exits the John. Violet deep cleans it and she walks out smelling like a skunk. Violet then rips her chest hair off and she beats up Bill. Bill gets knocked out cold. A few minutes later Bill wakes up and he goes to his BB gun shed. Violet runs to get her minivan keys. Violet runs into her minivan and she frantically tries to drive off. Violet drives off as Bill returns inside with a BB gun. William explains everything. Bill screams in anger and he drags William to his truck. Violet returns home. Bill gets up and he spanks Violet. Bill grabs the BB gun. Bill loads the BB gun and he shoots a window in anger. Violet starts crying and Bill eats the BB gun. William hugs Violet and William brings Violet to Bill's chair. Violet then screams and she takes a nap. The next day William starts his fourth school. Violet wakes up and she drags William's worthless rear end to the minivan. Violet drives off to a private school. William gets out and he walks to the principal's office. The principal gives William a schedule and William walks to his first period class. 12 minutes later William gets called over the intercom. William walks to the principal's office. The principal explains to Violette that William slapped a fellow classmate with a wet towel and he ripped a bathroom stall door off its hinges. Violette goes out to the auditorium and she spanks William in front of the entire school. Violette returns to the principal's office. The principal gives William a warning. Soon Violette and William get into the minivan and Violette drives 1 hour back to the house. 1 hour later Violette and William walk into the house. Violette gets surprised when Bill shoots William in the rear end. Bill then drives back to his work. A few hours later the family eats dinner and head to bed. A few days later the family eats lunch and they get into the minivan. Violette drives off to the Mount Airy Town Park and the family race to the all-you-can-eat fast food stand. Violette orders 1 deep fried salad and the boys each order a 50-pound bowl of meatball enchiladas. Violette and the boys sit down and they devour their meals. Then they throw their trash out and they drive home. Once home they head straight to bed. In the morning at 5 a.m. Bill wakes up and he gets ready for the day. He then eats a bowl of oatmeal and he drives out to work. 2 hours later Violette and William finish getting ready. A few hours later during lunch Bill comes home. He says that he got fired for stealing a pencil. Violette then gets angry. She tackles Bill and she throws him into a pile of manure. Bill then takes a 3-hour shower just to get the stench out. A week later William gets expelled from the private school he was in. William got expelled for hacking the school's mainframe and shutting down the electricity and Wi-Fi. Violette and Bill explode at William. They grab extension cords and start whipping William. Violette and Bill eat the extension cords and the family head to bed. The next day the family wakes up and they eat breakfast. A few hours later Violette, Andy and William are in the kitchen making cookies. William goes to reach for the red velvet cookie dough. He soon notices that the bag is gone. William walks upstairs and he kicks down Violette and Bill's bedroom door. Bill is found passed out with the cookie dough package empty. There is also a few cans of beer on the bed. William scolds Bill for eating the cookie dough. Bill then blames Andy about the cans of beer. William then starts throwing the empty cans at Bill. Then William runs downstairs. A few minutes later William walks upstairs and he takes Bill's iPhone. Bill then calls William a dingbat. William bolts outside and he deadbolts the front door closed. Bill gets up and he trips on a crumb. Bill then tumbles downstairs and he is cursing up a storm. Bill gets up and he walks to the front door. Violette and Bill rip the door apart. They walk outside and see Bill's phone is on fire. Andy exits the house and he gets into his Tesla. Andy drives off. Violette and Bill scold William and they douse the fire. Violette and William then scream in anger as Bill walks out to his BB gun shed. Violette and William run inside and they change into their swim costumes. Violette and William then jump into the pool and they rip open the pool liner as Bill walks to the ladder. Bill then floats away as the gush of cool water floods the yard and road. Violette and William are also dragged in the flood and they float to the road. 20 seconds later the family gets up and they get into an argument. Violette and Bill run inside. William takes this chance to hijack Bill's truck. William gets into the truck and he drives off to Wendy's. 30 minutes later William returns home with 20 bags of Wendy's. William walks inside and the family have Wendy's for dinner. The next day after lunch William is screaming his head off at his teammates on Call of Duty. Violette is getting a headache and she runs upstairs. Violette kicks the door down and she runs into the room. Violette screams in anger and she smashes William's headset. William gets up and he pushes Violette down the stairs. William deadbolts his door closed. William then puts another headset on and he continues screaming at his teammates because they are not helping. A few minutes later Violette walks upstairs and she turns a chainsaw on. Violette saws William's bedroom door in half and she throws William to the floor. A few hours later Bill returns home after a long day of working. Violette pokes and prods Bill. Eventually Bill admits to sleeping all day long at his new office job. Violette kicks Bill in the nutsack. Bill screams in anger and he rips his armpit hair off. Violette cooks dinner. Violette then calls for the boys. A few seconds later the boys run into the kitchen and they annihilate the soup bar Violette set up for dinner. A few days later Bill goes to his office job and he got fired. Bill enters the house and Violette asks why he is home so early. Bill says he got fired. Violette gets up and she walks outside. Violette returns with a mallet. She spanks Bill on his rear end with the mallet. Violette eats the mallet and she walks outside. A few minutes later Violette drives the minivan off the property. Bill chases the minivan. William walks outside and he sees Bill is screaming like an angry god. Violette drives home and she gets a punishment day. Bill spanks, bites, and punches Violette hundreds of times. Violette starts crying and Bill hugs Violette. Soon Violette and Bill drive off to the hospital. The next day they return home. William hugs Violette and Bill cooks up an all-you-can-eat buffet. William runs into the buffet and he makes a plate for himself and Violette. Bill takes the leftovers and he blends them into a nasty smoothie. Bill chugs the 19-pound buffet smoothie. Violette and William savor their food as they watch a couple episodes of The Simpsons. Violette and William walk into the kitchen and they do the dishes. Bill walks upstairs and he falls asleep. 1 hour later Bill races to the porta potty in their backyard. 3 hours later Bill returns and he is feeling much better. Violette and William head upstairs and William does his homework as Violette monitors over him. A few hours later William runs outside and he burns multiple months worth of schoolwork and homework. Violette smells smoke and she runs outside. Violette puts the fire out and she explodes at William. Violette runs to her shed full of mallets and other weaponry. 5 minutes later Violette returns with a bag full of weaponry. Violette eats the weapons and she screams in anger for no reason. A few hours later William is raging on his Xbox. Violette runs upstairs and she drags William's useless rear end to the kitchen. Violette demands that William is going to cook dinner. William agrees and Violette says he has 1 hour to create something good. 20 minutes later the smoke detector goes off. William takes the lasagna out of the oven. The lasagna is boiling and is overflowing out of the pan. William then rips the batteries out of the smoke detector. Violette walks into the kitchen and William pushes Violette into the living room. 40 minutes later William plates the dinner. William serves the dinner. William has created Pop-Tart pizza, deep-fried steak and deep-fried lasagna soup. Violette and Bill devour the meal and they adored it. The next day Bill starts his third office job. Bill drives off to his job. Violette watches Bill drive off. William wakes up and he gets ready for the day. Violette and William drive off to a school. 20 minutes later they are in the dean's office. The dean gives William a schedule and a uniform. William changes into the uniform and he walks to his third period class. Violette gets into her minivan. 2 minutes later Violette gets out of her minivan and she walks to the dean's office. Violette enters the office and she sits down. The dean explains that William has gotten expelled. The dean explains William bit another student. Violette explodes in anger and she nags the dean for expelling William over such a ridiculous reason. Violette and William go home. Once home Violette decides she is going to sue the dean. Violette goes to a lawyer and she hires him for the case. A few days later the trial begins. The trial lasts for 12 hours. After 12 hours the dean gives the Andersons 50 grand and William is let back into the Catholic school. The next day William gets ready for school. He puts on his uniform and he gets driven to the school. After gym class in the locker room William whips a fellow classmate with a wet towel. A few hours later Bill arrives home from his third office job. Bill tells Violette he got fired again. Violette takes a few steps back. She runs into Bill. Violette pushes Bill to the floor. Bill screams in anger and he falls down the stairs. Bill gets up and he starts crying. Violette and William chain Bill to his chair. Bill says a lengthy apology. A few hours later Bill is unchained. Violette and Bill beat the crap out of their son. Violette gets up and she starts crying. William hugs Violette and Bill walks upstairs to take a nap. 30 minutes later William runs upstairs and he blows an air horn into his parents' bedroom. Bill wakes up and he is seen with 3 6-pack boxes of beer. Violette walks into the bedroom and she scolds Bill for drinking 2.5 gallons of beer. Bill gets up and he tells everyone they are going to a wedding. The family gets changed into their fancier clothing. They get into the minivan and drive off to the wedding hall. 20 minutes later the family park the minivan and they walk into the hall. During the dinner the boys raid the kitchen for the food. Violette sighs and the family gets kicked out. Violette and the boys drive home. Once home the family sits down and they watch TV until 11 p.m. The family head to bed and they wake up the next day. During breakfast they eat 30 bowls of oatmeal. Violette does the dishes and she starts a cycle on the dishwasher. Violette and the boys get into the minivan and they drive off to the post office. They pick up 300 pieces of fan mail. Once home the family go live on YouTube and they unbox the 300 pieces of fan mail. After they end the live stream they eat lunch. After lunch the family changed into their swim costumes. Violette walks outside and she realizes the pool liner was busted by herself. The boys run outside and they repair the liner with flex tape. An hour later they get into the pool and they fight over a floaty. Violette and the boys dry off and they head inside. Violette and the boys change into their daytime clothes and they all take a nap. 3 hours later they wake up. William and Violette go into the office and William is forced to do his homework. William opens Google Classroom and he opens an assignment. A few minutes later William screams in anger and he grabs a wooden dowel. William breathes in and he starts running. William blows into the monitor with a wooden dowel. Violette screams in anger and she grabs the dowel. William unplugs the monitor and he drags it outside. A minute later the monitor is lit on fire. Violette walks outside and she fills a bucket with cool water. Violette runs to the monitor fire and she puts it out. A few hours later William heads to bed and his parents decide to prank William. Violette and Bill bang a gong and William jolts out of his bed. Violette and Bill laugh. William takes off his parents' noise-cancelling headphones. William puts headphones on and he bangs the gong so hard the gong shatters to dust. A few minutes later the police arrive. Violette explains everything and the police give the Anderson family a ticket for 30 grand for disturbing the peace. The next day the family changed into their fancy clothes. The family drive off to a charity fundraiser. Violette and the boys donate $20,000 to various charities. A few days later a bounty hunter bangs on the front door. Violette opens it and the bounty hunter demands the money for the ticket. Violette hands over 30,000 big ones and the bounty hunter leaves. After that the family change into their swim costumes and they walk to their backyard. A few seconds later the family jumps into the pool and they swim for 19 minutes. 19 minutes later they dry off and walk inside. William screams in anger and he grabs a pickaxe. William walks outside and he destroys Bill's truck. A few minutes later Bill walks to his truck so he can go to work. Bill glances at the truck and he ignores it. A few seconds later William gets thrown into a pile of trash. Violette picks up William and Bill drives off to work on his motorcycle. William goes inside and he starts crying. Violette hugs William and she suggests that he take a shower. An hour later William exits the bathroom and he is sparkling clean. After lunch William is quietly playing Minecraft on his Nintendo Switch. Violette hears a massive explosion of screaming. Violette decides to check in on William. William is hitting his Nintendo Switch with a mallet. Violette comforts William and she hugs him. William starts crying and he warms up his Xbox. Violette heads downstairs and she takes a nap. Back upstairs William is getting ready for a round of Fortnite with his friends. Violet wakes up when she hears a massive crash. Violet runs upstairs and she sees William's TV is on the floor and it is emitting smoke. Violet begins her calming rituals. Violet screams like a goddess and she nags William for 5 hours. 6 hours later Bill arrives home from work and he smells dinner. Bill walks to the kitchen and he takes the pan that contains their dinner. Bill annihilates the dinner and he places the pan in the sink. Bill then chugs a gallon of mayonnaise to wash the potato salad down his throat. Bill goes upstairs and he falls asleep. 1 hour later Bill is awoken. Bill walks into William's bedroom and he nags William. Violet runs upstairs and she breaks the fight up. Violet screams in anger and she barks at Bill for nagging William. The family gives up and they head to bed. The next day they have donut smoothies for breakfast. After breakfast they get ready for the day. Violet and Bill drive to their jobs and William is left home alone. Soon William sees Harry and Marv staring in the window. William sets up hundreds of traps. Soon Harry and Marv enter the house and they get caught in William's house of horror. A few minutes later the police come and they arrest Harry and Marv. William soon picks up his house of horror and he deep cleans the house. A few hours later Violette and Bill arrive home from work. They smell something nasty. Violette and Bill enter the kitchen and they see an entire cow is burnt to a crisp. Violette and Bill drag their dinner outside and they throw it away. Violet and Bill walk into the house and they smell rotten eggs. Violet and Bill sit down in the living room and William serves rotten eggs for dinner. William gets nagged at for cooking a questionable dinner. Violet screams in anger and she throws the rotten eggs at William. Bill gets up and he grabs a metal rod. Bill throws the rod into the living room TV. Violet screams in anger and she nags Bill for an hour. Soon William hugs Bill and he repairs the living room TV. Violet and the boys head to sleep and they wake up the next day. Violet and the boys get dressed and they drive off to an all-you-can-eat breakfast buffet. Violet and the boys arrive and they find a place to park the minivan. Inside the restaurant the family sits down and they are served several glasses of ice-cold water. Violet gets a single plate of food. A few minutes later the boys are allowed to get their food. The boys get up and they bolt to the buffet to get some food. Violet knows they are going to get a lifetime ban in a matter of minutes. The boys enter the food area and they scream with excitement. The boys grab every steamed tray and they run back to their table. The boys throw all the food at Violet and the boys run to the dessert table. The boys annihilate all the desserts at the dessert table. Then they see more food being brought out. The boys go to the food tables and they eat everything. Soon the boys race into the kitchen and they find anything edible. The boys race out of the kitchen leaving it absolutely destroyed. Then the boys race to the drinks area and they chug everything. Soon they race to the John. Violet sits there with food all over her. Violet screams like Godzilla and she rips her armpit hair off. Violet goes to the John. 3 hours later the family meet up at the table. Violet pays the bill. Soon the owner arrives and he bans the Anderson family for a week. Violet screams in anger and she nags the boys for the entire ride home. Once home the boys race to their bedroom and they nap for an hour. 1 hour later William wakes up and he walks downstairs. Bill is downstairs too. A few minutes later Violet is scolding the boys for eating so much food. Soon Violet drags the boys to the minivan. Violet chains them down and she drives off to a gym. Once at the gym Violet gets a gym membership for the boys. A month later of an intense exercise program the boys are back to a healthy weight. After the course finishes Violet cancels the membership. 3 hours later during dinner the boys are surprised with a massive spaghetti casserole. The boys fight to the death. Bill ends up victorious and he grabs a gallon of mayonnaise. Bill inhales the casserole and he chugs the mayonnaise. An hour later Violet and the boys are in the living room. Bill is setting up a new TV because he busted the old one. Violet screams at Bill for taking too long. Bill finishes setting the TV up and Violet loads up YouTube. They watch their own videos until midnight. In the morning after breakfast William gets onto the school bus. 1 hour later William walks into a classroom. The teacher hands out a booklet and William eats his booklet. A few hours later after gym class William is seconds away from getting into an entire class fight. William runs into the war. He fights to the death and a dust cloud forms. A few seconds later a locker is ripped off the wall and it creates a massive explosion when it falls to the floor. A minute later the bathroom is destroyed. Soon the gym teacher exits his office and he hears screaming and cursing from the boys' locker room. The gym teacher runs to get the administration. Back in the locker room everything is being destroyed. The admins and gym teacher enter the locker room as the fight is getting more intense. William is seen with a pickaxe. He is about to smash a sink apart. The admins break the fight up and the dust cloud fades. The staff bring the boys one by one to the director for their punishment. 20 minutes later William is dragged to the director's office. Violet and Bill are there and there is steam coming out of their ears. William sits down and the director pulls up the security cameras. A few minutes later Violet and Bill drag William to the minivan. Once home Violet and Bill scold William for his bad behavior. Violet and William start arguing. Bill steps in and he breaks the fight up. 1 second later Violet grabs her car keys. 3 seconds later Violet runs out to the minivan as she is cursing like a sailor. Violet gets into her minivan and she burns some rubber. The minivan speeds off to somewhere unknown. The boys get into Bill's truck and they drive off. 1 hour later the boys arrive at Wendy's. They go through the drive-thru and order 3 gallons of Wendy's chili. 20 minutes later the boys get their meal. The boys park in the parking lot and they annihilate the chili. 3 minutes later Bill throws out the cups and he drives off to find Violet. 12 minutes later the boys pull into a parking lot. They race to a John. 15 hours later they exit the John. The boys get into the truck and they open up a tracker that is attached to the minivan. A few hours later the boys find the minivan at a mega mall. Bill parks next to the minivan and the boys puncture the tires. The boys run inside and they find Violet. Violet explains everything. 2 hours later at the house Violet apologizes. William unchains Violet and Bill eats the chains. 20 minutes later a tow company drops the minivan off at the house. Bill pays the $600 receipt. A few hours later Violet cooks up a lasagna and salad. Casserole for dinner. Violet plates the casserole and she calls for the boys. 1 second later the house starts shaking. The boys fly downstairs and they sit down in the kitchen. Violet serves the casserole. The boys shove their portions of casserole down their throats. Violet sits there in disgust as the boys lick their plates clean. Soon the boys fight to the death for the last piece of the casserole. Bill cleans the plates and William loads them into the dishwasher incorrectly. Violet barks at William for loading the dishwasher up incorrectly. William runs upstairs. 2 minutes later Violet and Bill hear a massive explosion. They run upstairs. Violet opens William's bedroom door. 1 second later Violet and Bill enter William's bedroom. William is seen with a hammer as he is smashing his TV. Violet scolds William for breaking another TV. William ignores her and he runs downstairs to the living room TV. Violet screams in anger when William grabs a wooden dowel. William eats the dowel and he begs Violet and Bill for a new TV for his bedroom. Violette unwillingly agrees and Bill goes out to get a brand new TV. 2 hours later William is raging in his bedroom. Violette is watching TV when she hears a massive roar. 1 second later she runs upstairs. William is seen with a mallet and he is smashing his PlayStation 5. Bill flies up the steps a few seconds later when he exits the John. Violette is barking at William for smashing a perfectly good console that cost $500. Violette screams like a monkey and she pounds her chest in anger. Bill enters William's bedroom and he sees chaos unfolding. Bill grabs his 5F-4.43 device. Violette eats the mystery device and she blows up at Bill. Violette drags Bill downstairs into the kitchen. Violette forces Bill to chug a bottle of level 10 habanero hot sauce. 20 seconds later fire shoots out of Bill's mouth. Bill goes to the fridge and he annihilates 10 gallons of milk. Violette bursts in laughter and Bill decides to get revenge. Bill goes to the minivan and he fills the cup holders with quick dry concrete. Violette hears a concrete truck and she flies outside. Bill runs for his life but Violette picks up Bill. 20 minutes later Bill is chained down in his chair. Violette screams at Bill for his prank. Bill starts crying and Violette slaps Bill across the face. Bill gets unchained and Violette gets slapped. 20 seconds later the family head to bed. 2 days later during lunch the family are screaming at each other like monkeys. Bill gets out of his chair and he goes to the grocery store. 2 hours later the family brings everything in and they put away the groceries. Then Violette goes upstairs to take a nap. 20 minutes later Bill turns off the living room TV. Bill grabs an air horn and he flies upstairs. Violette gets awoken from an air horn. William runs for his life. A minute later the house starts shaking. Violette is nagging Bill. Bill gets up and he gets into his pickup truck. Bill drives to his 17th office job. 30 minutes later Violette gets a call from Bill's office. 2 minutes later Violette snaps her sunglasses in half in anger. A few minutes later Bill enters the house. Violette is looking angrier than ever. She is so angry steam is flying out of her ears. Violette screams in anger and she rips her leg hair off one by one. Bill starts breathing in. 20 seconds later Bill lets out a massive roar. A few minutes later the family are in the living room and they are watching the movie called Tom and Jerry 2021. Halfway into the movie William gets up and he screams like a lion. 2 seconds later William sits down and the movie resumes. After the movie Violette goes to the kitchen to cook up a pasta bar for dinner. 2 hours later Violette calls for the boys. The boys walk into the kitchen. The boys grab several steamed trays and they walk to the living room. Violette watches the boys shove pasta down their throats. Violette collects the trays and she places them in the sink. Violette calls for William to wash the dirty dishes. William flies to the dishwasher and he starts screaming. Violette forces William to wash the dirty dishes. William grabs Violette's wedding plates and he smashes them. Violette screams in anger and she barks at William. However William takes out a chainsaw and he destroys the dishwasher. Bill enters the kitchen and he unplugs the chainsaw. 2 seconds later William flies upstairs. 12 hours later William wakes up and he gets dressed. William packs his school bag and he packs a lunch. 20 minutes later William gets onto the school bus. 2 hours later he arrives at his Catholic school. During first period William eats his booklet. This causes the head teacher to slap William's wrist with a ruler. During lunch William gets called to the dean's office. In the office William gets notified that he has gotten expelled for no reason. 10 minutes later William gets picked up by his parents. Violette and Bill are angrier than ever. Violette calls the dean and she has a 30-minute phone call. Once home Violette decides she is going to get passive-aggressive revenge. Violette goes to create a plan. A few hours later she walks into the kitchen. Violette explains the top-secret plan to the boys. The boys agree to the plan. The next day while the dean is having lunch the Anderson family prepare to get their passive-aggressive revenge. Violette grabs a whoopee cushion and she puts it on the dean's office chair. Bill rearranges books and William unplugs the dean's monster paper shredder. The family hides. And the dean returns from his lunch break. A few seconds later a whoopee cushion goes off. The dean gets up and he walks over to his bookshelf. The dean screams in anger. 20 minutes later the dean tries to print something. He realizes it is not working. So the dean goes over to his monster paper shredder. He plugs it in. A few seconds later the Anderson family jump out of their hiding spots. They are laughing so hard that their voice box stops. They lost their voices. 1 minute later their voice boxes start up again. The family runs for their lives. They get into the minivan and book it home. A few hours later the family are eating dinner while watching TV. After they eat, the family goes to the kitchen and they wash and dry the dishes. Violette puts the dishes away and the family head to bed. They wake up 9 hours later and they get ready for the day. Violette and the boys get into the minivan after breakfast. Bill drives out to a 5-star restaurant. Violette made reservations. At the restaurant Violette and the boys meet up with Lucy, Zachary and Andy. The gang head inside and they get served a table. Violette and the family sit down and they order beverages. 20 minutes later the family orders their entrees. 1 hour later they are served their food. Bill grabs a fistful of pasta and he eats it. Soon the owner comes and he kicks the gang out. Violette pays for the food and everyone heads back to their houses. Back at the Anderson household Bill is being taped to his chair. Bill makes an elongated apology. 3 hours later William removes the tape and Bill runs to the John. 20 minutes later Violette goes to take a nap. Bill grabs a can of pepper spray. Violette wakes up and she gets pepper sprayed in the eyes. Violette screams in pain and she flies downstairs to wash her eyes out. Violette starts crying her eyes out and she sits down in Bill's chair. Bill enters the living room and he breathes in. Bill screams like Godzilla. Violette gets up and Bill beats the crap out of Violette. William breaks up the fight as usual. Soon Violette starts crying and she rips her chest hair off in anger. Soon Bill gets into his truck and he drives off. Bill returns home 20 minutes later from the BB gun express. Bill puts 200 BB guns into his BB gun shed. Violette screams in anger and she grabs lighter fluid. Violette runs outside and she burns Bill's chest of office supplies that he stole from his job. Violette screams like a god and she grabs a canister of gasoline. Bill douses the fire before Violette can use the gasoline. Bill gets into his truck and he drives off yet again. Bill goes to his office and he steals an entire trunk of office supplies. Bill drives home and he runs inside. William gets punched in the nutsack. Violette flies upstairs and she hugs William. Soon Bill screams in anger and he chases Violette. Soon Violette gets pushed into a pile of cow manure. Violette runs to the shower and she takes a 300-minute long shower. 5 hours later she gets out and she gets dressed. Soon the family have dinner and head to bed. The next day they wake up and they get 50 neon yellow suitcases. Violette grabs the suitcases and she opens them. The boys fly upstairs and they grab all their clothes. The boys walk downstairs with all their clothes. Violette gives the boys 3 suitcases each and the boys put their clothes into their 3 suitcases. The boys grab Violette's clothes and they put the clothes into 3 suitcases. Violette packs up half the house into the remaining 41 suitcases. Bill cooks up several turkey burgers for brunch. Violette knows what is going to occur. William smells the burgers and he flies into the kitchen. William grabs a burger and he puts some fixings on it. William puts ketchup and barbecue sauce on it. William puts the top bun on and he devours his turkey burger. Bill hugs William for not burning or destroying the burgers. 1 hour later the family grab their suitcases and they drag them outside. The driver called Zach loads the suitcases into the bedriven van. The family helps Zach with the suitcases. William and his parents get into the van. A few minutes later Zach gets into the driver's seat and he drives the Anderson family to JFK Airport. A few hours later the van arrives at JFK Airport. Zach takes the suitcases out and he drives off. The family put the 50 suitcases onto several baggage holders. Violette and the boys wheel the baggage holders into the airport. Bill checks in and the family walk to the baggage drop-off. The family drop their 50 suitcases off and they walk to security. Violette and William pass without any trouble. Bill goes through the metal detector and the alarm goes off. Bill takes a box of knives out of his pants. Bill throws it out and security lets Bill pass. A few minutes later the family gets released from security. Violette and the boys walk to their gate. Violette makes a pit stop at a restaurant. Violette orders a bowl of salad. The boys each order a 50-pound bowl of Lazy Man lasagna. The Anderson family walk to their gate. Once at the gate the family eat their lunch. A few seconds later the boys finish eating their bowls of Lazy Man lasagna. Violette and the boys use the John. A few minutes later they get their carry-ons and they board the plane first. Violette got first class for the family. Once at their seats they sit down and they get ready for a 10-hour-long flight to Dubai. 1 hour later the boarding finishes. The flight attendants give their safety demonstration. Violette and the boys take a nap. 30 minutes later they wake up and they look in awe as the plane arrives at the runway. 2 seconds later they jerk back into their seats. The plane zooms down the runway and it takes off. Violette screams in anger for no reason and she rips her chest hair off. Bill calms Violette down and Violette sits down. William gets on a FaceTime call with Andy. William and Andy chat for 20 minutes about life. After that William FaceTimes Lucy. 20 minutes later William ends the FaceTime call. Violette starts crying and she puts her headset on. Violette turns the TV on and she plugs the headset into the TV. 20 minutes later Bill wakes up from his nap. Bill gets out of his seat and he sees William is playing Xbox. Bill grabs the Xbox and he rips it apart. 8 hours later the Anderson family packs up their carry-ons. The family walk down the jet bridge and they enter the international airport of Dubai. Violette and the boys race to baggage claim. They arrive at baggage claim and they collect their 50 neon yellow suitcases. A few minutes later the family exit the airport. Violette rents a pickup truck. The boys load the suitcases into the bed of the pickup and Bill chains the luggage down. A few minutes later they drive off to a fancy hotel. 37 minutes later they arrive at the hotel. Violette checks in and she walks up to the room. The boys park the pickup and they bring up the suitcases with the help of luggage holders. Violette and the boys open the door and they scream with excitement. Violette and the boys race inside and they find their bedrooms. Violette and Bill unpack their clothes. William takes out his entire video game setup. William plugs everything in and he unpacks his clothes. A few minutes later William warms up his Xbox. William turns on Call of Duty and he gets into a round with a team of 4 players. A minute later William starts saying no words. William screams like an angry monkey. Violette and Bill are in the living room when they hear a monkey screaming. Violette and Bill get off the couch and they bolt to William's bedroom. Violette opens the door. She sees William screaming no words at his TV. Violette and Bill enter William's room. They nag William for his sailor talk. Violette and Bill exit the room and they return to watching TV. Back in William's bedroom William is screaming curse words. William gets eliminated and he blows up in anger. William gets off his bed and he smashes his controller. Violette gets up and she flies to William's bedroom. Violette opens the door. A few seconds later Bill gets up and he ventures to William's bedroom. Bill enters the bedroom and he sees Violette is spanking William. Bill picks up Violette and he walks outside. Violette gets put down. Violette explains everything. Bill rips his armpit hair off and he flies to William. A few seconds later Bill starts spanking William. Violette joins the spanking session. Violette and Bill finish the spanking. Bill walks to the kitchen and he cooks up lasagna soup. 30 minutes later Violette and William enter the kitchen and they sit down. Bill serves the soup and he sits down. The family tuck into a massive feast of lasagna soup. A few minutes later William is forced to wash the dirty dishes. Violette drags William to the dishwasher. Bill puts the dirty dishes into the sink. William opens the dishwasher. William starts loading the dishwasher. Violette explodes at William for not pulling the rack out. Violette rips the rack out and she forces William to continue. William finishes loading the dishwasher. William then takes out dishwashing soap. Violette says that he can't put it into the dishwasher. William drowns the dishwasher with gallons of dishwashing soap. William closes the dishwasher and he starts a cycle. Violette starts crying because she knows what is about to occur. William screams in anger and he pushes Violette. William bolts to his room as Violette falls to the floor. 1 second later Violette lets out a painful howl. Bill gets up and he takes Violette to a couch. A few minutes later William exits his bedroom. William walks to the living room and he gets nagged at. Violette and Bill start crying because William is a troublemaker. William walks to the kitchen. William sees a massive ocean of bubbles originating from the dishwasher. William grabs a vacuum and he cleans the bubbles up. William unplugs the vacuum when it starts smoking. William throws it away and he cleans up the ocean and dishwasher. The family heads to bed and they wake up 12 hours later. After breakfast the family gets a visit from the owner. The owner kicks the family out. The family pack up their stuff into the 50 neon yellow suitcases they brought. Violette and the boys finish packing and they check out. The family gets into the pickup and they drive to the airport. They check in and drop their luggage off. They then pass security with no trouble. A few hours later the family got onto the plane. 12 hours later the family collect their luggage. They get driven home and they unpack everything. Then they head to bed. In the morning they have breakfast. Violette does the dishes and she goes out to the minivan. The boys load up into the minivan and the family drive off to a mall. 30 minutes later they arrive at the mall. Violette and the boys run into the mall and they go to every store. 2 hours later they drive home. Once home they unpack and wash the new clothes they got. Violette and the boys eat lunch. After lunch William and his parents head to bed. In the morning William starts back at Mount Airy High School. William wakes up and he gets ready. After breakfast William gets into the minivan. 3 hours later Violette exits the house. She gets into the minivan. 3 minutes later they arrive at MAHS. Violette throws William out of the minivan. 1 second later Violette drives off. During the first period William gets a work packet. William starts working on the packet. A few minutes later William screams in anger and he rips apart the packet. During the second period William takes out a toy. William eats it and the teacher sends William to the office. The headmaster gives William a warning. A few hours later during lunch William takes out a sandwich. After lunch William is in his 8th period class and he throws his desk at the teacher. William then goes to the headmaster's office. William sits down in a chair. The headmaster opens a security camera recording. The headmaster plays it. The incident with the desk plays. Violette watches in anger as the tape ends. Violette screams in anger and the headmaster says William is one office visit away from getting expelled. William is dragged to the minivan. The ride home is full of curse words and nagging. Once home William is dragged inside and Violette deadbolts the front door closed. Violette throws William into Bill's chair. William is chained down with crusty chains. A few seconds later Andy and Lucy walk into the house via the back door. William gets unchained and Violette eats the crusty chains. Lucy and Andy hug the family. Soon everyone gets into the pool with their clothes on. 1 hour later Bill arrives at the house. Bill hears playful screaming coming from the pool. Bill goes to his chest full of various power tools. Violette screams for everyone to get onto the deck. William, Lucy, Andy and Violette get out of the pool and they run to the deck. They fly up the deck stairs. A few seconds later Bill returns with a power saw. Bill turns it on and he cuts a massive hole in the liner. Soon cool water floods the backyard and Bill gets dragged with the current. Violette sighs and she repairs the liner. Violette turns the hose on and she starts filling the 1,000-gallon pool. 3 hours later Violette turns the hose off and she puts chemicals in. Soon Violette heads inside and she cooks dinner. 20 minutes later the boys fly into the kitchen. Violette serves a meatball sandwich pot pie. Bill takes the entire pot and he grabs 5 gallons of mayonnaise. The 3 gallons of mayo has a total of 120,320 calories. Bill sits down and he eats the entire pot pie. A few minutes later Bill chugs the 3 gallons of mayonnaise. Bill gets up and he licks the pan clean. Violette knows what is going to happen. Bill gets up and he races to the porta potty in their backyard. William and Violette head to bed. 12 hours later William and Violette wake up and they get ready for the day. During breakfast Bill exits the porta potty. Bill walks into the kitchen and he sits down. Violette serves Bill 1 banana. Bill gets out of his seat with anger and he screams at Violette. Violette gives up and she gives Bill a gallon of oatmeal. Violette watches in disgust as Bill chugs the oatmeal through a straw. Bill scrapes the fish bowl clean and he places it in the sink. Then Bill eats the scrapped off oatmeal. Violette screams like a god and she sighs. A few seconds later Violette does the dishes. William gets his backpack and he gets into the minivan. Violette gets in and they drive to MAHS. 3 minutes later they arrive at MAHS. William gets out of the minivan and Violette speeds off to the house. William walks into the school and he hears the bell ring. William bolts to his first period class. 40 minutes later in the locker room William is taking a shower after gym class. William gets dressed and he gets his bag. The bell rings and William races to his second period class. 20 minutes into William's second period class William gets a booklet full of word problems. William takes out a match and he burns his 30-page booklet. A minute later William is in the headmaster's office. William gets expelled and he walks to the entrance of MAHS. A few minutes later Violette and the minivan pull up. William gets into the minivan. Violette drives home and she gets onto a phone call with Bill. Violette explains everything to Bill. Once home Violette and Bill nag William. Violette walks upstairs and she unplugs William's multiple consoles. Violette takes the cables away and she puts them into a hidden safe. Violette locks the safe and she walks downstairs. Violette explains to William what she did. William runs upstairs and he sees his cables are missing. Violette explains to William that this is his punishment. However Bill wants to punish his son even more. Bill decides to slap William. A few seconds later Bill slaps William. A minute later Bill pushes William down the stairs. William falls downstairs and he screams in pain. Violette screams downstairs and she takes William to the emergency room. A few hours later a doctor says William has no major injuries or broken bones. William just has a few scrapes and several permanent scars. William gets discharged. Violette and William head home. Once home, Bill explodes in laughter. The family have a discussion. They head to bed 3 hours later. The next day, William wakes up and he dreads having to start in a fifth school. William gets out of his bed and he gets dressed and he has a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast. Violette wakes up and she drags William into the minivan. 12 minutes later, they arrive at the school. William and Violette walk into the principal's office. Violette and William sit down and the principal hands William his schedule. William walks to his class as Violette speeds off. Once in class, William is forced to introduce himself. William greets himself and he is forced to say a hobby that he enjoys. William says he likes to burn things as a hobby. The teacher forces William to sit down. 10 seconds later, William gets called over the intercom. William walks to the principal's office. William enters the office and the principal gives William a detention for saying he likes to burn things as a hobby. After school, William walks to the detention room. William sits down in a chair and everything he has on him is taken away. 3 hours later, William gets his stuff back. William walks outside and he sees the minivan. William enters the minivan. Violette doesn't make eye contact or chatter for the entire 10-minute car ride. Once home, William runs upstairs. Violette states her disappointment in William cannot be overstated. William ignores Violette as he enters his bedroom. Violette sits down on Bill's chair and she falls asleep. 2 hours later, Violette wakes up and she cooks dinner. 30 minutes later, Bill kicks the front door down and he screams for his dinner. Violette gives Bill a 12-pound bowl of chicken tenders. Bill grabs 10 gallons of melted butter. In total, the calories of Bill's dinner is 277,361 calories and the entire dinner weighs 95 pounds. Bill goes to the living room. He sets up the 10 gallons of melted butter and the 12-pound bowl of chicken tenders. Bill devours the entire meal in 15 minutes. Violette watches Bill run to the porta potty in their backyard. 30 minutes later, Bill walks inside. Violette and William are fast asleep. Bill, being his usual self, decides that he wants more food. Even after the massive meal of 277,361 calories. Bill walks into the kitchen and he opens the fridge. 1 second later, a silent alarm goes off. A few seconds later, Violette gets awoken by her fridge alarm. Violette runs downstairs and she tells Bill it is time for bed. Violette and Bill head upstairs and they fall asleep. 3 hours later, Violette gets awoken when she hears a monkey screeching. Violette runs into William's room. William is screaming like a monkey at his teammates on Fortnite. Violette decides what she is going to do. Violette has the brilliant idea to get a BB gun. Violette exits the bedroom and a few minutes later, Violette returns to William's bedroom with a BB gun. Violette asks William how he is playing Xbox. William says he opened the hidden safe. Violette ignores it and she shoots William's rear end. William screams in anger and he punches Violette. Bill wakes up and he runs into William's bedroom. Bill tells everyone to head to bed because they are having a guest over for a vacation to Australia. The family head to bed and they wake up 5 hours later. The family gets ready for the day and they have oatmeal sandwiches for breakfast. After breakfast, William is forced to wash the dishes. Violette hands William a pile of dirty dishes. William puts the dirty dishes into the dishwasher. He then puts in a cap full of dish detergent. Violette closes the dishwasher and she starts a cycle to clean the dishes. 3 hours later, Bill hears the doorbell go off. The family runs to the door and Bill opens it. Spongy enters the house and they all greet each other. Violette gives Spongy a massive hug. Soon the boys join the hug. The family exit the hug and Spongy gives everyone a present. The family open their presents and they hug Spongy. A few minutes later, everyone is sitting down in the kitchen. Bill serves everyone deep-fried lasagna. Bill sits down and everyone eats the meal. A few minutes later, Bill collects the plates and he washes them. He then dries them and he puts the dishes away. A few minutes later, Bill walks to the living room and he finds Violette, William and Spongy watching TV. Bill becomes furious and he runs outside. A minute later, Bill enters the living room with a BB gun from his BB gun shed. Bill shoots the TV because Violette, William and Spongy were having fun. Violette stands up and she screams at Bill for smashing the TV. William goes to the basement and he goes to the TV room. William grabs a replacement TV and he walks upstairs. William replaces the TV. Then Spongy and William go up to William's bedroom because Violette and Bill are having a massive quarrel. William and Spongy sit down on William's bed and they play GTA 5. A few hours later, Violette and Bill are still arguing. Soon William and Spongy break up the fight. Violette says they were fighting over a soccer game. Everyone heads to bed and they wake up. 12 hours later, after they wake up, they get ready for the day and they have breakfast. After breakfast, William goes to the basement and he brings up 17 neon yellow suitcases for their 1-week trip to Australia. Violette and the boys run upstairs and they pack their clothes into suitcases. A few minutes later, they return. Spongy helps the Anderson family pack up other necessities and other items. 1 hour later, they eat lunch. After lunch, Violette does the dishes. 20 minutes later, the be-driven van arrives. The gang bring their suitcases outside and the gang get into the van. 10 minutes later, the driver speeds off to the airport. 3 hours later, they arrive at the airport. The driver hands the gang their suitcases. Soon the gang checks in and they drop off their luggage. 20 minutes later, they pass through security with no trouble. 3 hours later, they board and they sit down. 17 hours later, they deboard and Spongy races and they get the 17 neon yellow suitcases. Violette and the boys meet up with Spongy as they are renting a car. Spongy gets the car and a worker brings it up. Then the gang load up into a 30-year-old pickup. Bill puts the suitcases into the bed of the pickup. Then they drive to their hotel. 30 minutes later, they arrive at their hotel in Perth, Australia. Violette and Bill walk into the check-in room and they check in. 30 minutes later, the gang open the door to their hotel. They gasp in amazement at the size of the room. The room is the size of a condo. Spongy and William get to share a room. Violette and Bill get to sleep in the master bedroom. They unpack and Spongy goes to cook up dinner for the gang. 30 minutes later, they serve the lasagna. Violette and the boys sit down and they speed eat a pound of lasagna. 3 hours later, everyone is watching TV. They head to bed at midnight. The next day after breakfast everyone changes into their swim costumes. 30 minutes later Violette packs a pool bag and the gang walk to the pool. They find a cabana and they put their stuff down. Violette, Bill, William and Spongy put on sunscreen and they jump into the pool. 20 minutes later Violette screams like Godzilla and she beats up the boys for no reason. A minute later Violette is hauled away by security. Spongy hugs William and Bill. Then the three of them dry off and pack up. A few minutes later they are watching TV. 1 hour later Violette returns to the room. Violette takes out a knife and she stabs the TV for no reason. Spongy screams for their life. Spongy runs to William's room and they pack up their suitcase. A few minutes later the Anderson family are kicked out of the hotel. The gang pack up everything and they drive to the airport. 30 minutes later Violette drops off the 30-year-old pickup. 20 hours later the gang arrives at the Anderson household. Spongy screams at the family. Soon Spongy drives off never to be seen again. Violette and the boys walk inside and they unpack their stuff. The next morning William wakes up dreading have to start at his 59th school. Violette drags William to the bathroom. William gets ready and he has a 40-pound bowl of oatmeal for breakfast. Violette and William run to the minivan. Violette and William drive off to the school. 3 hours later they arrive at the school. William gets out and he walks to the principal. A few minutes later William sits down in his history class. A minute later William is called to the principal's office. A few seconds later William sits down. The principal explains what William did. Violette screams in anger when the principal said William threw a pencil at the teacher. The superintendent says William is no longer allowed in any school in North America. The superintendent says William has one more chance at MAHS. Violette sighs with relief. The principal states if William is expelled he will go to court. Violette sighs in anger and she drags William to the minivan. William and Violette drive home. The ride home is full of cursing and nagging. 3 hours later they arrive at the house. William gets out of the minivan and Bill is standing outside. Bill picks up William. Bill takes William inside to the living room. Bill barks at William for getting expelled the 127th time. Violette says William has one more chance before he is going on trial. Bill ignores it. A few seconds later Bill slaps William. 17 hours later William gets up for the day. William realizes he has to go back to MAHS. William gets ready for the day. 30 minutes later Violette and William arrive at MAHS. William gets out of the minivan and Violette speeds off. 30 minutes later in the gym locker room William is called to the headmaster's office. A few minutes later William grabs his backpack and he goes to the office. A minute later William and Violette are in the headmaster's office. The headmaster explains William slapped a student. The headmaster also says William has to repeat the 12th grade if he doesn't behave. William gets the threat and he promises to stop breaking the rules. Violette goes home and William goes back to class. 2 weeks later William wakes up and he is very excited to graduate high school. William gets dressed into his tuxedo and he goes to MAHS. 3 hours later William gets his diploma. Then at home William gets an email from a college he applied to. The college declined the application. He got declined because he got 4,282 detentions, 692 suspensions and 127 exclusions in 2 years. Violette reads the email then she rips her sunglasses apart in anger. Violette flies upstairs and she rips William's bedroom door off its hinges. William screams like a little girl and he jumps out of his window. William runs to grab the minivan keys. A few minutes later the minivan is driven off the property. Violette runs outside and she sees the minivan is missing. Violette breathes in and she screams like an angry god. A few minutes later the minivan pulls up to the front of the house. William gets out of the minivan and he walks inside. A few seconds later Violette starts nagging William. William hands Violette some mozzarella sticks from Arby's. Violette eats them in 3 seconds. Violette then walks upstairs and she repairs the door to William's bedroom. A few minutes later William warms up his Xbox. William gets into a round of COD and he gets eliminated in 30 seconds. Violette runs upstairs when she hears a massive boom. William knows he is in tons upon tons of trouble. Violette enters William's room. She sees a massive hole in the wall. William explains why he did it. Violette ignores it and she punches William for punching a hole into the wall. William repairs the hole as Bill arrives home from work. Violette runs downstairs and she asks how Bill's day was. Bill states he got promoted from janitor to supervisor to the manager of the chief executive officer of the owner of the chief finance officer department. Bill also says he got a $450,000 pay raise. Violette screams with excitement. A few minutes later Bill cooks dinner. 30 minutes later the family are enjoying some deep fried steaks for dinner. After dinner William is forced to wash the dishes. William does the dishes correctly this time. After William washes the dishes he goes to bed. The next day Violette wakes up and she drags William to the kitchen. Violette and William get ready for the day. After breakfast William gets into the minivan. A few minutes later Violette speeds off to a college. 50 minutes later they arrive at the college. Violette finds a place to park. A few minutes later they are greeted by the dean. The dean hands William a schedule and a key to his dorm. William says he isn't packed yet to live in a dorm. Violette admits she forgot to mention it to William. The dean walks William over to his first period class. During the class William is forced to write a paragraph about himself. William is handed a laptop. He signs in with his new college email. A few minutes later William throws his laptop to the floor. The teacher walks over to the laptop. A few minutes later William and Violette are in the dean's office. Violette screams at William for breaking a laptop for no reason. William explains about the paragraph. The dean states that William has one more chance before he is put on trial. William ignores the part about the trial. A few minutes later William is in his second period class. During the class William does some word problems on some very difficult calculus problems. William finishes the pack and he hands it into the teacher. A few hours later during lunch William raids the kitchen. Then the dean drags William to his office. A few minutes later Violette sits down in front of the dean's desk. The dean explains the entire situation. The dean says William is going to be reported to the FBI for his trial. He also says William is expelled. 1 hour later, back at the house, William is being beaten like crazy. Then Bill enters the house. Bill hears what William did. Bill screams like an angry god and he picks up William. Bill then walks upstairs. A few seconds later, William screams in anger. Violette flies upstairs and she enters William's bedroom. Violette sees Bill is smashing William's PS5. Violette tackles Bill, then she beats the poop out of Bill. Violette gets up and she has blood on her fists. Bill starts crying like an infant. Bill runs to his phone. A few minutes later, he is taken away in an ambulance. Violette cleans the mess up and she gives William a brand new PS5. A few days later, during dinner, Bill returns from the hospital. Bill enters the kitchen and he hands Violette the bill for his stay. Violette sees the total is $42,482 for a 3-night stay. She also sees that Bill spent $50,000 at the hospital restaurant and self-service. Violette sees the total is over $300,000. Violette screams in anger when she realizes they will be flat out broke and in debt for decades. A few minutes later, Violette calls her insurance company. Violette hangs up the phone when they say they won't be paying a single penny. Violette starts chasing Bill for spending $250,000 while he stayed at the hospital. A few minutes later, Violette tackles Bill. Bill apologizes and he starts crying. Violette then realizes she will need to get a job. Violette goes to the phone and she calls Burger King. A few minutes later, Violette gets the job. Violette hangs up and she screams with excitement. Violette soon realizes their lives will change because of their newly acquired debt. Violette creates a massive plan to deal with the budget with their remaining money. The next day, Violette starts her job. She does so well she gets promoted to a CEO in 2 hours. After work during dinner, Violette explains her day. She explains she got promoted and a yearly salary of $200,000. After dinner, Violette does the dishes and she goes to bed. The boys head to bed 3 hours later. The next after breakfast, William and Violette get into the minivan and they drive 2 hours to a random college. 2 hours later, they arrive at the college. Violette pulls into the parking lot and she finds a parking spot. 20 minutes later, William is handed his schedule. During the first period, William hurls a chair at his teacher. A few minutes later, William is in the owner's office. The owner expels William for his behavior. A few minutes later, William gets into the minivan. The ride home is full of cursing, fighting and tons of nagging. 1 hour later, the minivan arrives at the house. Violette gets out of the minivan and she drags William into the house. William frantically apologizes. Hundreds of times. A few seconds later, the house phone goes off. Violette picks up the phone. A few minutes later, Violette throws the house phone into their pool. Violette says to William that his trial is happening. William screams and he beats up the couch. The next day after breakfast, William and his parents get dressed into their fancier clothing. The family gets into the minivan and they drive to the court of Washington, D.C. 8 hours later, they arrive. Violette parks the minivan and the family walk into the court. Violette and the boys sit down. 13 hours later, William is found innocent and he gets let go with a warning. 8 hours later, the family arrive at the house. William and his parents get changed into their pajamas and they head to bed. 9 hours later, they wake up. During breakfast, Bill is given a single banana for breakfast. Bill breathes in and he lets out a humongous roar. Violette gives in and she hands Bill 150 Pop-Tarts. In total, Bill's meal has a total of 60,000 calories and 12,500% of his daily recommended sugar. After breakfast, Bill goes to work for the day. An hour later, Violette is taking a nap as William is raging on his Nintendo Entertainment System or NES. William gets eliminated in Donkey Kong. A few seconds later, Violette wakes up when she hears very loud screeching sounds coming from upstairs. Violette gets up and she flies to William's bedroom. 20 seconds later, Violette opens William's door. Violette enters the door and she sees William is screeching like a howler monkey. Violette pans the room with her eyes. A few seconds later, she finds a hole in the wall and William's NES is on the floor. Violette comes to the conclusion that William threw his NES at the wall. William comes clean and he tells the truth. Violette sits down on William's bed and she has a massive talk with William. 2 hours later, Violette gets up and she leaves the bedroom. A few minutes later, Violette surprises William with 89-inch 139,000 Kled Neon HD TV that cost $10,000. William plugs it in and he entreats Violette with gratefulness, hugs and thousands of thanks. A few hours later, Bill returns home from work. Bill greets Violette and he says he got a promotion from the rank of supervisor to the manager of the chief executive officer of the owner of the chief finance officer department to the rank of super duper supervisor to the manager of the chief executive officer of the owner of the chief finance officer department. He also says he got a $5,000 pay raise. Violette hugs Bill for climbing the rank ladder. Violette then surprises Bill with 4-foot-long meatball subs from Subway. Bill sits down in the kitchen and he eats his meal in a few minutes. A few minutes later, William runs downstairs. And he asks for dinner. Violette hands William a 6-inch veggie sub. William screams in anger and he walks outside. William grabs a BB gun and walks back inside. William pulls the trigger. A second later, the veggie sub explodes. William then returns to Bill's BB gun shed. A few minutes later, William walks to his bedroom. A few minutes later, Violette hears a massive crash. Violette and Bill fly to William's bedroom. A few seconds later, Violette opens the door and she sees William has smashed his Rubik's Cube. William starts crying and Bill takes out a water blaster. Bill blasts William with gallons of water for breaking something. A few seconds later, Violette and the boys head to bed. The next day after breakfast, the family packs up for their 4th vacation. After packing everything up, Violette says they are going to New Zealand for 2 weeks. Soon a be-driven van pulls up. Violette and the boys drag their 9 suitcases outside. Soon the driver puts the suitcases into the trunk. Then the family load up into the van. A few minutes later, the driver speeds off to JFK. 4.5 hours later, they arrive at the airport. Violette and the boys get out and the driver hands them their suitcases. A few minutes later, Violette checks in. Then they wait 30 minutes to drop their luggage off. Then they walk half a mile to security. During security, the Anderson family pass safely. 30 minutes later they arrive at the gate. Violette uses her laptop to edit videos for their YouTube channel. Bill takes a nap and William plays on his Nintendo 64. 3 hours later the family board the plane. They walk up a flight of stairs to their first class seats. They each get a room to themselves. A few minutes later the A380 plane finishes boarding. Soon the pilots taxi the plane to the runway. 14 minutes later the Anderson family jerk back into their seats. 17 hours later the plane arrives at the jet bridge. Violette and the boys deboard and they go to collect their 9 neon yellow suitcases. 20 minutes later they go through customs. After that they rent a minivan. After renting the minivan they drive to the hotel. 20 minutes later they arrive. Violette finds the parking lot and she pulls into a spot. 3 minutes later Violette finds check-in. 20 minutes later she checks in. Then the family grab their suitcases and they walk up 34 flights of stairs. 30 minutes later they open the door to their hotel room. Then they enter and they gasp in amazement. They go to their bedrooms and they unpack their clothes. 10 minutes later they eat dinner and head to bed. 12 hours later they eat breakfast. After breakfast they change into their swim clothing. Violette packs a pool bag and they head to the elevator. 20 seconds later they arrive at the pool. The boys race ahead. And they find a cabana. Violette finds the boys and the family put sunscreen on. Violette goes into the hot tub and the boys have a cannonball contest. 30 minutes later Violette gets into the pool. The boys find Violette and the family swim around for a while. 2 hours later Violette and the boys order lunch. Bill ordered a pound of meatballs. William ordered a small pizza and Violette ordered an extra small salad. 30 minutes later the family tuck into their lunches. 20 minutes later the family clean up and they pack up. Then they head back to their hotel room. 12 minutes later the family are in the living room watching TV. 10 minutes later William goes to his room. 1 hour later Violette and Bill run to William's bedroom after they hear a massive crash. Violette opens William's bedroom door. Then Violette and Bill enter William's bedroom. Violette sees a broken window. Bill starts cursing like a sailor and Violette joins too. A few minutes later they say very naughty words. A few minutes later William screams in shock when Violette says a super inappropriate word. Bill hears it too. Then the boys confront Violette for her potty mouth. Violette screams in terror when she finds out what happened. Violette starts crying and she passes out. 1 hour later Violette regains consciousness. Violette screams when she sees the family are in the minivan. Bill says they got kicked out of the hotel. Violette cries because she spent $40,000 for the trip. William comforts Violette with a massive hug. William and Violette fall asleep. 30 minutes later Bill wakes up William and Violette. William grabs their suitcases and Bill returns the minivan to the rental car place they rented it from. Violette and the boys walk into the airport and they go through customs. 20 minutes later they check in and they drop their luggage off. 10 minutes later Bill gets caught with a hunting knife that he hid in his boxers. Bill gets punched in the face for packing a hunting knife. A few minutes later Violette and the boys are let off with a warning. 30 minutes later they board their plane. The family find their seats and they sit down. They put their carry-ons under the seat in front of them and the flight attendants give their safety briefing. 30 minutes later the plane arrives at the runway. Soon the plane takes off and the Anderson family stare at their electronics. 10 minutes later Violette gets served a snack. 16 hours later Violette and the boys are collecting their neon yellow suitcases. After they get their suitcases they get driven home. 5 hours later Violette and the boys unpack their stuff. After they unpack everything they head to bed. The next day after breakfast William and Violette get into the minivan. Violette drives. Off to Whole Foods. 20 minutes later William is dragged into the Whole Foods. Violette gets an application and William fills it out. 20 minutes later William gets an interview. Halfway through the interview William hands the manager his resume. The manager screams in anger after glancing at the hobbies part. The manager asks William if he likes to make fires for fun. William confirms the fire starting hobby. A few minutes later Violette sits down in the manager's office. The manager explains to Violette about William's arson habit. Violette confirms the habit is true. The manager screams for them to get out of the store and to never come back. The manager also says the Anderson family is banned from every Whole Foods in the world. Violette and William get into the minivan. The ride home is full of fighting and cursing. A few minutes later the minivan crashes into a tree. Violette and William get out of the minivan and they resume their fight. 20 minutes later the 20 cars are towed away and the crash scene is cleaned up. 10 minutes after the cleanup Violette and William are driven home in a fire truck. 5 minutes later Violette and William enter the house. Bill starts nagging Violette and William. Violette explains the entire thing. A few minutes later Bill beats up Violette and William for their roles in the 20-car pile-up on Main Street. After the beating Violette cooks lunch for the boys. 30 minutes later Bill ends up eating William's lunch. After Bill finishes William's lunch Violette confronts Bill. Bill tries to defend himself. Violette tricks Bill with a fake gift card to Wendy's. Bill runs to his car and he drives off to Wendy's with a fake gift card. 3 minutes later William gets to eat lunch. A few minutes later the front door is kicked open. Bill starts marching into the kitchen. Bill and Violette get into a massive fight over the fake gift card. William starts crying and he runs outside. William hijacks Bill's car to stop his parents' pointless bickering. Violette and Bill run outside when they hear a car horn. A few seconds later Violette and Bill see Bill's car has been stolen by William. Violette runs up to the driver's door. She opens the front door and drags William out of the door. William explains he was trying to stop the fighting. Violette and the boys head inside and they go to the basement. A few minutes later Violette starts washing the laundry. Meanwhile the boys are getting tools out. A few minutes later the boys are on the roof doing some much needed repairs. An hour later the boys get off the roof and they put away the tools. 3 hours later Violette starts cooking super spicy chili. Violette takes out a bottle of level 10 habanero hot sauce. She opens the lid and she pours the entire 16-ounce bottle into the chili. A few minutes later the chili starts bubbling when Violette puts in a packet of blended Carolina ghost peppers. A few minutes later Violette takes the pot outside. Once outside, the crock pot melts. Then the chili melts into the crust of the earth. Violette watches the hole get larger and larger. Violette drowns the hole with liquid nitrogen. Violette heads inside when the whole chili is rocked hard. Once inside, Violette calls a construction company. She asks if they can fill the hole she created. An hour later, the boys go to the backyard deck. William glances at the hole. A few seconds later, Bill screams for Violette to get her rear end to the deck. Violette runs outside and she explains the situation. 30 minutes later, the construction company fills the hole. Then the family head to bed. The next day during breakfast, William and Violette are peacefully having breakfast. A few minutes later, Bill gets up. He races downstairs. A few seconds later, Bill starts screaming for his bowl of oatmeal. Violette gets up and she hands Bill a 10-ounce bowl of oatmeal. Bill takes out a plastic straw and he speed drinks the bowl. A few seconds later, Bill licks the bowl clean. Bill then goes to work. A few minutes later, Violette and William are doing the dishes. After doing the dishes, the two of them watch TV for a while. 3 hours later, William makes some grilled cheese and tomato soup for lunch. After lunch, Violette does some chores and William watches some Jawtooth. 1 hour later, the front door is kicked off its hinges. Bill marches into the kitchen. A few seconds later, Bill takes a paper towel and a matchbox. Bill picks up the front door and he drags it to the street. Bill then grabs gasoline and he lights the front door on fire. Violette douses the fire. A few seconds later, Violette and Bill get into a raging fist fight. William hears the fist fight. William then grabs the minivan keys. He runs outside and drives the minivan off. 20 minutes later, William parks the minivan in front of the house. He grabs a folding chair and he watches the fist fight. A few minutes later, the fight turns deadly when Bill tackles Violette. A few hours later, Violette and Bill are driven to the hospital for their injuries. 10 days later, Violette and Bill come home for dinner. William serves Violette and Bill some soup. After dinner, the family head to bed. The next day, Bill gets up at 6 a.m. and he goes to work. Then Violette and William get up. They get ready for the day. 1 hour later, Violette and William drive off. 20 minutes later, they arrive at a cheese factory. They plan on having a tour. A few minutes after they park, they hand their tickets to the tour guide. 2 hours later, the tour arrives at the cheese tasting room. Violette eats 3 pieces of cheese. However, William fills a few duffel bags with various cheeses. After the tasting room, the tour finishes. Violette and William head to the gift shop and they purchase several souvenirs. 1 hour later, they arrive at the house. Once inside, William and Violette heat up some frozen mozzarella sticks for lunch. After lunch, Violette watches some TV and William takes a nap. 1 hour later, Violette and William watch an episode of Heavy Rescue 401. 1 hour later, Violette turns the TV off when the new front door arrives. William gets the toolbox and he helps Violette install the new front door that is 300% stronger. A few hours later, Violette hears Bill's car stopping. She also hears a whole lot of cursing. Violette knows the front door is toast. A few seconds later, Bill opens the front door. Bill explains he was cursing at the baseball game he was listening to. A few seconds later, Violette walks into the kitchen. Violette grabs a steamed tray and she hands it to Bill. Bill takes the lid off and he eats his dinner of potato casserole. A few minutes later, Violette does the dishes. 20 minutes later, Violette goes to her bedroom to sleep. A few hours later, the boys head to bed. The next day during breakfast, Violette and William get ready for the day. After breakfast, Violette and William drive off to a college. 2 hours later, Violette pulls into a parking spot. Violette and William get out and they walk to the dean's office. 1 hour later, William is handed a schedule and a key to his dorm. A few minutes later, the dean hears an explosion coming from the dorm area. A few minutes later, William is expelled. A few hours later at home, Violette is crying because she can't handle William's behavior anymore. William hugs Violette. A few seconds later, Violette cheers up and she drives William to a therapist. 20 minutes later, William is in a therapist's office. The therapist tries talking to William. A few seconds later, William runs for his life. Violette picks up William and she brings William back to Rebecca's office. 20 minutes later, the session ends. Violette pays for the session. 20 minutes later, Violette and William enter the house and they eat an entire pizza for lunch. 40 minutes later, Bill's car comes to a stop. Bill enters the house and he starts cursing. Bill sits down and he screams for his lunch. Violette hands Bill his lunch. 20 minutes later, Bill gets back into his car. A few minutes later, Bill's car speeds off. Back in the house, Violette is taking a nap and William is watching Heavy Rescue 401. 3 hours later, Violette wakes up and she calls for William. A few seconds later, William walks downstairs. Violette hands William the trash. William runs outside and he puts the bag of trash into a trash can. 3 minutes later, Violette does the dishes. William goes to the basement. 50 minutes later, William goes up the basement stairs. Violette hands William some toilet cleaner and a toilet brush. William runs to the John and he cleans the potty. 10 minutes later, William exits the John. William puts away the potty cleaning supplies. Then Bill enters the house. Violette grabs Bill's dinner. 10 minutes later, Bill does the dishes. After the dishes are done, the family head to bed. The next day during breakfast, Violette announces she will be divorcing Bill. Bill reacts to this by slapping Violette. William intervenes and he stops the fight. 1 hour later, Violette arrives at court. Violette goes in and she gets a legal divorce. 20 minutes later, Violette hands Bill the divorce. Bill screams like a god. A few minutes later, Violette kicks Bill out of the house. Bill packs up all his belongings and he packs everything into his car and into a moving van. Bill then speeds off and he plans to move in with his mother. A few minutes later, Violette and William celebrate by inviting Andy, Lucy and Zachary over for a party. 30 minutes later, Andy announces he is moving to Nepal for college. Lucy, Zachary, William and Violette hug Andy. Soon Andy leaves for college. 1 hour later, Lucy and Zachary drive away. William and Violette head to bed. The next day, William searches for an apartment online. 3 hours later, Violette and William get into the minivan. 20 minutes later, they arrive at an apartment complex. 10 minutes later, William purchases the apartment. 1 week later, during the morning time, William gets ready for his first day in employment. After getting ready, Violette drives William to Wendy's. One shift later, William is driven home. William explains he got promoted to junior manager. Violette congrats William as they drive home. 10 minutes later, they arrive at the house. The next day during breakfast, William finishes packing up. He plans on moving in 1 hour. 1 hour later, a moving truck pulls up in front of the house. A few hours later, the movers finish packing up. 1 hour later, the movers finish unpacking everything and they help William set up the furniture. Violette helps William set up his kitchen, bedroom and bathroom. 20 minutes later, Violette drives off. A week later during lunch, Violette visits William for lunch. During lunch, William says he is going to have his driving test today. Violette cries because William is growing up so fast. An hour later, William does his road test. 3 hours later, William gets his license. William runs to a car dealership and he purchases a cheap Toyota. The next day, Violette picks up William. William knows Bill is having a trial. 30 minutes later, the trial begins. The trial lasts 7 hours. After the trial, Bill is found guilty for child abuse, robbery, and arson. The judge gives Bill the death sentence. 3 hours later, Bill is executed. William and Violette scream with excitement. A few hours later, Violette and William go back to their homes. 12 hours later, Violette and William arrive at the United States Supreme Court. Violette parks in a parking garage. 10 minutes later, Bill's trial begins. The trial lasts 7 hours. 7 hours later, Bill is found guilty for child abuse, arson and robbery. Bill gets sentenced to death. Soon Bill is dragged out as he is kicking, punching, cursing, crying and screaming for his life. 1 hour later, Bill gets the electric chair. Violette and William pass out when Bill is finally gone. A few minutes later, Violette and William wake up. They scream with excitement when they realize Bill's reign of terror is over. 8 hours later, Violette arrives at her house. A few days later, Violette moves out of her house and she moves in with William. William agreed with Violette about her moving in for her final years. The next day, Violette retires from her job at Wendy's. A few hours later during dinner, Violette and William eat some pasta. After dinner, the two of them head to bed. The next day after lunch, William hits the town. William spends the entire day trying to find a girlfriend. Then William gets to have dinner with his crush. During the dinner, William acts like a gentleman. After dinner, William pays for it all. Soon Ella says she wants to have another date. Soon William heads back to his condo. 20 minutes later, William tells Violette about the date. Violette hugs William for growing up so fast. Violette and William head to bed. 6 days later during a date, William pops the question to Ella. Ella says yes to marrying William. A few days later, Violette and William wake up. They get ready for the day. A few hours later, William changes into a tuxedo. Violette changes into a dress. 1 hour later, William and Ella exchange vows and they kiss. A second later, the wedding guests clap and they scream with excitement. A few minutes later during the dinner, William and Ella have a wonderful time. After the dinner, William and Ella open hundreds of presents. 20 minutes later, everyone is dancing. The next day, William starts to pack up. A few hours later, William moves into a condo with Ella. William and Ella plan on purchasing a house soon. After settling in, William and Ella head to bed. The next day after breakfast, William gets a call from a local emergency room. The doctor on the phone says Violette has been seriously injured. William hangs up the phone, then he races to his Toyota. William drives to the biggest hospital in Maryland. Some time later, William sits down in Violette's room. Violette's doctor says Violette is getting worse. William sees she is in agony. William becomes very emotional and he starts crying. An hour later, Violette says her last words before going into emergency surgery. William then drives back to the condo. 3 hours later, the hospital calls again. A few minutes later, William hangs up the phone and he begins sobbing. A few seconds later, Ella comforts William. William tells Ella that Violette passed away during surgery. William and Ella head to bed. The next day, William goes to a doctor's office. After the appointment, William gets diagnosed with clinical depression. William heads home and he falls onto the living room couch. William mourns Violette's loss for the entire day. The next day, William and Ella purchase a 2-story family home. A few days later, William and Ella settle into their new home. The next day after breakfast, William and Ella decide to adopt a kid. William and Ella head to an adoption center. An hour later, William and Ella decide they want to adopt twins. 2 hours later, William and Ella sign the paperwork. William and Ella start crying when they legally adopt the 11-year-old twins they wanted. William and Ella help their kids pack up. 2 hours later, they arrive at their house. The kids' names are Zach and Rebecca. The next day during breakfast, William brings Zach and Rebecca to school. 7 hours later, Ella picks them up. Once home, William hugs Zach and Rebecca. Rebecca heads to her room. Zach watches some TV. A few hours later during dinner, the family eats some pasta. Soon William, Ella, Zach and Rebecca have a movie night. William starts tearing when he remembers having movie nights with Violette. After watching a movie, the family head to bed. The next day after lunch, William packs up for a Saturday outing. Ella and the kids get into the Toyota and they wait for William. A few minutes later, William gets into the Toyota. Ella drives off to the town park. 3 minutes later, the Anderson family arrives at the town park. Ella and the kids get out. William gets the picnic basket and the family find a spot to have a picnic. A few minutes later, the family set up. After setting up, they have some lunch. 1 hour later, they pack up and go back to the Toyota Corolla. 10 minutes later, William drives the family to a mall. 30 minutes later, they arrive at a mall. Ella and the kids get out at the entrance. Then William finds a place to park. 10 minutes later, William meets up with Ella, Zach and Rebecca in Macy's. Soon Ella gives Zach and Rebecca $100. 1 second later, Zach and Rebecca speed off. William and Ella follow the kids. A few minutes later, Zach and Rebecca arrive at the Lego store. They spend their money on Lego sets. 30 minutes later, the family enter their house. Zach and Rebecca run to their rooms to work on their Lego sets. William and Ella sit down and they watch some TV. 3 hours later, William goes to the kitchen and cooks some chili for dinner. 30 minutes later, the family is eating chili for dinner. After dinner, the family head to bed. The next morning the family gets ready for the day. After getting ready, William and the kids get into the Toyota. 5 minutes later, William and the kids arrive at the grocery store. 70 minutes later, William pays the $500 bill. 30 minutes later, Ella and William finish putting the groceries away. Soon Ella and William eat lunch and the kids watch TV. 30 minutes later, Ella does some chores. 1 hour later, Ella finishes her chores. Soon Ella enters the John to push out a number 2. 10 minutes, Ella exits the John. William and Ella change into their swim costumes and they get into their pool. A few minutes later, Zach and Rebecca jump in. 30 minutes later, the family get out. Then they change into their pajamas. They then watch some TV until 8:30 at night. The next day, William wakes up Zach and Rebecca. William and the kids get ready for the day. 15 minutes later, William, Rebecca and Zach get into the Toyota. 1 minute later, William drives off to Mount Airy Middle School. 2 minutes later, William drops the kids off at Mam's. 30 seconds later, William speeds off to his job. A few minutes later, William arrives. William parks the Toyota and he walks inside. 30 minutes later, William gets promoted to a junior executive. William gets a $40,000 pay raise. 5 hours later, William drives back to Mam's. He picks up Zach and Rebecca. 10 minutes later, they arrive at home. Then they head inside. 10 minutes later, Ella arrives home from work. Ella races inside to do some laundry. William goes to the kitchen and he does some dishes. A few hours later, the family have dinner. After dinner, the family head to bed. The next day after breakfast, William and the kids walk to Mam's. 10 minutes later, Zach and Rebecca enter the school. 5 minutes later, William gets a call from the Mam's principal. 30 minutes later, William and Zach are having a talk about Zach cutting class. After the talk, William hugs Zach. A few hours later, Ella and Rebecca arrive home. Ella hugs and kisses William. 20 seconds later, Ella makes some PB&J sandwiches for Zach and Rebecca. 10 minutes later, Ella calls a babysitter. 30 minutes later, Ella and William drive off when the babysitter arrives. 30 minutes later, Ella and William arrive at a 4-star restaurant. 3 hours later, William pays the $300 bill. Then they head home. 35 minutes later, Ella hands the babysitter $100. Then the family head to bed. The next day at 4 a.m. William wakes up. He wakes up Ella and the kids. 30 minutes later, the family finish packing up. An hour later, the family load up into a taxi. 4 hours later, the taxi arrives at JFK. The taxi driver gives the Anderson family their luggage. Then the family heads inside. 10 minutes later, Ella checks in and she hands over their luggage. 30 minutes later, they pass security with no trouble. 10 minutes later, Ella, William, Zach and Rebecca race to gate 48. 6 minutes later, they arrive at the gate. William hands their tickets to a worker. 2 minutes later, the family board the plane. 6 hours later, they deboard. Soon the family collect their neon yellow suitcases. 10 minutes later, they exit the airport and they admire the view of Aruba. Ella rents a minivan and the family speed off to the Costa Linda Hotel. 20 minutes later, Ella checks in. William parks the minivan. 5 minutes later, Ella and William and Zach and Rebecca enter their hotel room. 15 minutes later, the family change into their pajamas. Then they head to bed. The next day after breakfast, the family change into their swimsuits. 10 minutes later, William packs a pool bag. Then they walk to the pool. 5 minutes later, the family puts on sunscreen and they jump into the pool. 30 minutes later, they dry off and head back to the room. 1 hour later, the family eat lunch. After lunch, William and Ella watch some opera on TV. 20 minutes later, the family walk to the parking lot. 30 minutes later, the family arrive at the edge of Aruba's desert. William checks into the tour. 10 minutes later, the family gets onto a duck boat. 10 minutes later, the tour begins. The family are driven around the desert. 3 hours later, the tour ends. Then the family drive back to Costa Linda. 30 minutes later, they enter the room. Then they head to bed. The next day after lunch, they pack up. Then they check out and drive back to the airport. 20 minutes later, William drops the minivan off. Then they enter the airport. Soon they check in and drop off the luggage. 30 minutes later, they go through customs and security. 10 hours later, they arrive at home. Ella, William, Zach and Rebecca enter and they unpack. Then they head to bed. The next day, William and the kids get ready for a school play. 2 hours later, Ella and William find a seat in the auditorium. 10 minutes later, the school play begins. 3 hours later, the play ends. William and Rebecca congratulate Zach and Rebecca for their amazing performance. A few minutes later, the family head home. 15 minutes later, the family have some nachos for lunch. 30 minutes later, William and Ella clean up. Soon Ella goes to the John. 10 minutes later, Ella exits the John after pushing out a 3-pound number 2. Soon William does some laundry. Then Ella joins William. Ella tells Zach and Rebecca to put their clothes away. A few minutes later, Ella goes to the kitchen. A few seconds later, she starts washing the dishes. Then William walks into the kitchen. William makes some snacks for the family. 10 minutes later, the family are enjoying their snacks while watching a Halloween movie. 3 hours later, William cooks some pasta for dinner. 30 minutes later, the family are enjoying pasta and garlic bread for dinner. 10 minutes later, Ella and the kids head to bed. William does the dishes then heads to bed. The next day after breakfast, Ella and William get Zach and Rebecca into the Toyota. William drives the kids to Mam's. 10 minutes later, William arrives home. Then William and Ella watch some TV together. 30 minutes later, William orders some Domino's. 20 minutes later, Ella and William tuck into some pizza and cheese bites. After lunch, William does some laundry. 20 minutes later, William gets into the minivan and drives off to Mam's. 10 minutes later, William, Zach and Rebecca enter the house. Ella gives Zach and Rebecca a huge hug. 10 minutes later, Ella and William cook some lunch for the kids. 30 minutes later, Zach and Rebecca tuck into a piece of deep-fried lasagna. After lunch, Ella does the dishes and William does some vacuuming. After that, the family got into the Toyota. 3 minutes later, William drives off to a grocery store. 10 minutes later, William arrives at Stop and Shop. After finding a place to park, the family head inside. 1 hour later, they drive home. Once at home, William and Ella put the groceries away. A few minutes later William and the kids head to the Toyota. A few minutes later William drives off to a park. 10 minutes later Zach and Rebecca are playing tag and having a wonderful time. William monitors over the kids. 3 hours later William and the kids head home. 10 minutes later they arrive home. Soon Ella cooks dinner. 30 minutes later the family eat turkey burgers. After dinner William does the dishes. Then the family head to bed. The next day after breakfast Zach throws a fit. William says he has to go to the final day of school. Zach gives in and gets ready for the day. 30 minutes later Zach and Rebecca say goodbye and they walk into Mam's. 3 hours later William picks up the kids. William hugs them and congratulates them for passing 7th grade. 5 minutes later they arrive home. Ella runs outside and hugs Zach and Rebecca. 10 minutes later they head inside and eat lunch. After lunch William heads to the living room. Ella and the kids join. Then the family watch some TV. 7 hours later they head to bed. The next day William wakes up with sharp pains in his heart. 10 minutes later William goes into an ambulance. 20 minutes later Ella gets a call that William has passed away. Ella screams and starts crying. 10 minutes later Ella breaks the bad news to the kids. A few days later William's funeral was held. Meanwhile in heaven William and Violette are having a wonderful time as Bill is being tortured in the underworld. End of story.